Good afternoon. Welcome to Assembly Natural Resources. Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson. Assemblywoman Bilroy Axelrod. Assemblywoman Brown May. Assemblywoman Considine. Assemblyman DeLong. Assemblywoman Duran. Assemblyman Gurr. Assemblywoman Hanson. Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch. Assemblyman Watts. Assemblyman Urick. Chair Cohen.
I am present. Thank you. Please mark Assemblymember LaRue Hatch absent excused. Some housekeeping before we begin. Again, welcome everyone. Please silence your electronic devices. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table by the door and provide a business card to the committee secretary. For those joining online, please be sure to mute your microphone when you are not speaking to minimize any background noises. When testifying, please turn on the microphone and clearly state your name and any affiliation, if any, and spell your name, and then turn it off when you are done speaking. As for handouts, please provide 15 hard copies for members of the public. Electronic copies should have been provided 4 p.m., or I'm sorry, noon on Friday, last Friday. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions during the meeting, even if we don't agree on all of the positions. And please note, committee members will be using our laptops and other electronic devices to review documents, etc. Please don't view this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. And again, special thank you to Assembly members Duran and Urick, who came out of a hearing in Commerce and Labor that they've been in since, well, today just since 1:30, not 12:30 like the other day, but then we'll be going right back in at 6 o'clock or so. Then also, we are going to start with our work session. Then we will have our bill hearing on 313, and then we will have public comment to end out the meeting. So with that, we will begin the work session. And just to note, we are going to roll Assembly Bill 162. We did receive another amendment about an hour ago, and I want to make sure, although it was a very short amendment, I do want to make sure that committee members have an opportunity to review it and consider it. So we will definitely have that on the work session for Wednesday. But so with that, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Becky Peratt, Committee Policy Analyst. Assembly Bill 20 revises provisions relating to the account to finance the construction of treatment works and the implementation of pollution control projects. Specifically, the bill expands entities eligible to receive money from this account and replaces the list of authorized uses for money distributed from this account, and instead requires that money be used in accordance with federal law. Additionally, AB 20 revises provisions related to the account to finance the construction of projects and the account for set-aside programs. Specifically, the bill expands how funding from both accounts can be used by requiring that money in both accounts be used in accordance with federal law. Finally, AB 20 removes the requirement that not more than 3 members of the Board for Financing Water Projects may be of the same political party, and expands the list of eligible recipients receiving certain grants from the board.
Okay, committee, do I have any questions? Okay, seeing none, I will take a motion to do pass.
So moved.
I have a motion from the vice chair. Do I have a second from Assembly Member Watts? Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay? Okay, that passes unanimously, and I will ask the vice chair to take the floor statement.
Thank you.
Moving on.
Assembly Bill 70 revises provisions relating to the use of proceeds collected from the $3 game tag application processing fee. Specifically, the bill requires Nevada's Department of Wildlife to use these proceeds for wildlife management activities that protect non-predatory big game mammals and their habitats. Also, the bill removes the requirement that any program developed for the management and control of predatory wildlife uses at least 80% of the amount collected from the $3 application fee on lethal removal. Finally, the bill requires that when expending money collected from the fee, the department prioritizes certain programs, activities, and funding considerations. Assemblyman Watts proposed an amendment that removes the language requiring the department to use the game tag application fee proceeds for wildlife management activities that protect non-predatory big game mammals, and instead requires that the department use these proceeds as directed by the applicant for either developing and implementing a program for the lethal removal of predatory wildlife or wildlife management activities for the protection of non-predatory game species in their habitats. The amendment also removes the option to use game tag fees for conducting certain research and removes provisions requiring the department to prioritize certain programs and funding considerations in expending money collected from game tag fees.
Committee, do we have any questions? Okay, seeing none, I will take a motion to amend and do pass.
So moved.
I have a motion from the vice chair. Do I have a second? I have a second from Assemblymember Urick. Do we have any comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Okay, that passes unanimously, and I will ask Assemblymember Watts to take the floor statement.
Assembly Bill 184 creates the Clean Trucks and Buses Incentive Program and the account for clean trucks and buses to be administered by the Division of Environmental Protection. The bill establishes the amount of the base incentive, eligibility criteria to receive the base incentive, and an increase to the base incentive, vehicle eligibility and application requirements, various processes for the approval of contractors and submission and processing of voucher applications, and performance requirements for eligible entities receiving the incentive. Finally, AB 184 allocates 35% of funds received from the Federal Carbon Reduction Program to fund the account. Assemblyman Watts proposed an amendment that, amongst other things, adds certain state agencies to the list of eligible entities, makes a one-time $4 million allocation from the State General Fund to start up the program, provides for Nevada Department of Transport oversight of the program, adds certain businesses to the categories eligible to receive an increase to the base incentive, increases the number of incentives that eligible entities may receive per year, and removes criteria related to vehicle eligibility and application requirements, various processes, and performance requirements, and instead provides that these shall be determined by the division through rulemaking.
Committee, do we have any questions? Okay, seeing none, I will take a motion to amend and do pass.
So moved.
I have a motion from the vice chair. Do I have a second? I have a second from Assemblymember Considine. Any comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay? Nay. Okay, I have a nay from Assemblymember Urick. The bill passes as amended. Assemblymember Considine, would you like to take the floor? Thank you.
Assembly Bill 220 revises various provisions related to water conservation. There are 3 amendments proposed, one from Southern Nevada Water Authority, one from Assemblywoman Newby and Brown May, and one from the Division of Water Resources.
Okay, do we have the representatives from Southern Nevada Water Authority? Would you like to come forward and speak about the amendment and take us through that? And then Assemblymember Newby, if you'd also like to come up and discuss yours when they're done, and then also Assemblymember Brown May, if you'd like to say something, if you're welcome to. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Andy Belanger with the Southern Nevada Water Authority, here to walk through the conceptual amendment on AB 220. I'm going to not make a comment about Section 1 of the bill, since Section 1 is covered by the amendment that Assembly members Newby and Brown May have suggested. We are supportive of that language that they're providing. I would just note that there's a reference in there to 85% funding for septic conversions. We support that. The health district would like that to be modified to say to the extent funding is available, and we support that as well. The remainder of Section 1 is identical in both amendments, but it further specifies that the health district can impose administrative penalties for noncompliance. It can accept funding from federal, state, and local sources, and can enter into interlocal agreements to fund septic conversion programs. Sections 3 to 5 of the bill have to do with the municipal backstop language that's in 445A. And our amendments provide further protections to local governing bodies regarding public water systems. Specifically, it limits what the obligation of the local government is, and you can see that in Section 3, Sub 4. The local governing body agrees that as its sole and exclusive obligation in the event of a default by the builder, developer, or owner of the water system shall be to use the surety provided in subsection 5 or 6 to contract with and pay an operator responsible for the continued operation and maintenance of the water system. So these amendments to sections 3 through 5 limit what the responsibilities of the public water, what the local governing body is related to the public water system. And we've worked with NDEP to make sure that that language that they had some concerns about were addressed. So it puts the obligation on the builder to make sure that the builder has established the proper funding source for the water system as it exists. Sections 6 of the bill, that has to do with the Water Sense program, and I don't believe we made any changes in Section 6. Section 7, we changed the number to 1,250 feet, and we did that throughout on the water sections. The next major change was in Section 13 of the bill. We clarified that that those provisions are only applicable in counties with a population of 700,000 or more. We removed the exemption for landscape irrigation fixtures that are 50 years or older from all applicable sections. We heard testimony and concern about Section 25 of the bill that had to do with changing a may to shall in 534-110. That's been removed from the bill. In Section 26, we've provided a 730 days to any holders of temporary permits who may be required to connect to a municipal water system, and restores the language related to domestic wells so that the existing protections for domestic wells that were previously in 534-120 are restored and in this amendment. We've added a new section 27.5 that requires the Colorado River Commission to review and consider any changes to entitlement holders of the Colorado River. And as we testified in the hearing, we amended Section 29 to clarify that the language does not apply to water diverted from the virgin or muddy rivers as it relates to the septic conversion program and the septic prohibition for new septic systems in areas served by the Colorado River. We added an additional year to the deadline for the irrigation system review in Section 30. And in Section 34, we added a requirement that the board, the Water Authority Board, authorized by resolution any emergency powers delegated to the general manager, and require that any such use of those emergency powers be ratified by the board within 15 calendar days. So in general, that's what the proposed amendment does, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have related to that proposed amendment.
Okay, committee, I don't want to rehear the bill, but as far as that part of the amendment, do we have any questions? And then we'll address the other part of the amendment. Okay, seeing none. Assemblymember Newby, do you want to?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Sabra Newby. I'm representative of Assembly District 10. And within Assembly District 10, there are a number of septic owners, and I had been very concerned about the financial burden and operational burden that this bill would place upon them. So, in working with Assemblywoman Brown May and with SNWA, I appreciate you reviewing and considering this amendment to Section 1. Section 1, would you like me to go through it, Madam Chairwoman? Okay. Section 1, subsection 1 strikes the language about the property being within 400 feet of a community sewage disposal system, and instead specifies that the property must be served by a municipal water system. And then also maintains the date of January 1, 2054. What this does is essentially take out those properties that have their own well and requires it only for municipal water systems. Subsection 2, it adds in language that the Board of Health will enter into an agreement with the Water Authority to create a program to pay no less than 85% of the cost to abandon a septic system and connect to a community sewage system disposal system for no fewer than 200 property owners each calendar year. So what this does is it increases greatly the amount that will be covered by the Water Authority and or the Board of Health. I still want to get it to 100%. I'm not even going to lie, but we can get it to 85% right now in this amendment, and I'm still working with the involved folks to try and get it fully covered. It also specifies 200 property owners, or up to 200, or sorry, no fewer than 200 property owners each year. It then strikes subsections A, B, and C, and then on to subsection 3, then no changes there. Subsection 4, there's new language there that requires the District Board of Health to adopt regulations on administrative penalties for noncompliance. And these penalties and regulations have to be adopted by a vote of 2/3 of all of the members on that District Board of Health. Also, subpoint B, that they should prioritize properties where the sewer disposal system is adjacent to the property with the septic system. So essentially, they start with the priority properties closest and then move out. Subsection C, there's a one-time grant of extension of 5 years if there's insufficient funding. Subsection D, this allows the special improvement districts and the landscape improvement districts, also known as SIDs and LIDs, in case there's additional funds that need to be covered. The property owners could actually finance those through the municipality over an extended period of time. Again, I'm still trying to get to 100% coverage. And then E, they may revoke a septic permit if the fees are not paid, and they may require immediate connection. And F, they may enter into agreements to secure funding for this program to fund all of those conversions. Subsection 5, it strikes some language regarding a commercial individual system for the disposal of sewage. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And Assemblymember Brown May, before we take questions, do you want to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. And first, I want to thank my colleague for all of her really great work on this effort. There are a number of constituents that live in Assembly District 42. They've reached out with significant concerns relative to this. Some of the information that was shared was not accurate where we are because, as we all know, we move so quickly with regard to some of the amendments. The largest concern that was identified was really the availability of funding. And so really trying to work to get us to 100% of the funding for homeowners that could potentially be impacted by this while we are really working hard on water conservation, right? How do we reclaim all of the water that we work? And so I know that there's been a significant effort there. I want to assure all of our constituents in our districts that we have heard all of the concerns that have come to us and take that very seriously as we work to craft this amendment. I think it's really important to get that on the record, that we continue to work toward 100% funding, and that those property owners are given an ample opportunity to be able to elect into this process over an extended period of time and seek reimbursement. So it's very similar to what we did with regard to turf conversion over many, many years and creating that funding source. We'll continue to work on identifying what that funding source is so that no homeowner who is on a fixed income will be adversely affected by this policy to conserve water. And I think that's the most important thing, right? No adverse effects for homeowners who are on fixed incomes that just can't afford to do this conversion. We'll continue to work to solve those issues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Assemblymember Watts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank Assemblywoman Newby and Assemblywoman Brown-May for their work on this amendment. You know, I just want to second some of the remarks that, you know, we definitely heard the concerns that were brought forth by members of the community and are continuing to work to strengthen and improve this measure. I just wanted to put a couple of additional facts out there. So first of all, I just want to put a really fine point on it that anybody who's getting their water service from a well will not be impacted under the proposed amendment. So we heard I heard a lot of concern. I think my colleagues did as well about that. So now this is addressing if you're getting your water service from our municipal water provider, that will then now be connected and that loop will be closed. But if you're using both a well and a septic system, you would not be impacted at all under the proposed amendment. I appreciate the move up to 85%. From the first conversations I had with the Water Authority about working on this, making sure that we did not create negative financial impacts on people was a top priority. I think this is a really positive step in that direction. I think the opportunity to create improvement districts is another opportunity that can help address some of those things. And you know, I think by honing in on this, we can really deliver the resources to make sure in as many cases as possible that the full costs are covered. But I would also note that there's programs for connecting to municipal water service and moving off of domestic wells in Southern Nevada, and that has an 85% requirement. And so this is also just helping align some of the existing policies that we have in place. And I just want to commend also that the thought behind moving to folks getting water service. First of all, it's a lot easier for folks to understand if they are impacted or not. You know, we have some existing distance requirements put in place, and so I think that's where we kind of initially looked at going, but I think this is a really smart approach. So I just wanted to thank everyone who, first of all, made their voices heard, but also for those that worked on the amendment for this measure. I think it's certainly improved it.
Thank you for that. And we'll also be looking at neighborhoods, or the program will also be looking at neighborhoods together. So it's not going to be houses in a bunch of different neighborhoods. It's going to be looking at houses that are clustered together and close to the system, so that will help keep costs down as well, correct?
That's correct, and I think that's covered where we say that we're going to prioritize those neighborhoods first that are closest to the sewer system.
Thank you. And then we did receive a friendly amendment an amendment from the Board of Health, where with the up to 200 homes per year, in fact, that's going to be as they can afford. So it'll be, or I should say it'll be not 200 required, but up to 200 if they can afford 200 under the program. Is that being accepted?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, thank you for that question. Saber Newby again, Assembly District 10. Yes, their concern was that the current language says no fewer than 200. Now, we know, and I know from, and I'm sure Ms. Brown May knows as well, from hearing from our constituents, that different properties are going to cost different amounts to replace this, and some properties have more than one septic system that will need to be replaced. So their concern was if they can only do 195 per year, they didn't want to be running afoul of the law. So I think their suggestion is a wise one to add in that language to the extent that the money is available to get to that 200 mark every year.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so we'll include that as a friendly amendment. So with that, do we have any other questions? Okay, seeing none, and thank you for coming in, Assembly Member. I will take a motion to amend and do pass. I have a motion from the Vice Chair. I'll take a second from Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod. Do I have any comments? Please go ahead, Assemblymember Yurick.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to take a brief moment to acknowledge that I can fully appreciate the intent of this bill and the challenges that we're having with water in Nevada, and particularly off of the Colorado River system. It's a very real issue that's trying to be addressed here, and I want to publicly acknowledge and commend Assemblywoman Newby, Brown May, and the Southern Nevada Water Authority for their continued efforts to try to address the abundant amount of concern that I was given by my constituents. I represent District 19, which has a large number of people that would be impacted by this bill. And so I want to acknowledge and publicly appreciate or express my appreciation for those that were trying to work, and I think it did come a long way. Unfortunately for me and my district, I don't think that it came far enough for me to give it my full endorsement and support at this point. So I will be voting no, but I want to right now say that I will continue to do everything that I can to assist the efforts and the policy that's attempted to be addressed. Right now, it just faces too much of a burden, a financial burden on people in my district that are on fixed income. So if there's anything that I can do moving forward, I avail myself to that.
Okay, seeing no other comments, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Okay, so those who are nay can raise your hands, please. Okay, so I have Assemblymember DeLong, Yurick, and Hanson. With that, it passes as amended, and I will ask Assemblymember Brown May to take the floor statement, and we will move on to the next bill.
Assembly Bill 249 allows pet food, specialty pet food, and commercial feed intended for consumption by horses to contain hemp if it is manufactured, distributed, and sold exclusively in Nevada for use in the state. This allowance excludes contract feeders and customer formula feed. The bill also excludes pet food, specialty pet food, and commercial feed for horses that contains hemp from the provisions defining adulterated commercial feed if it is manufactured, distributed, and sold exclusively in Nevada for use in the state. Additionally, AB 249 authorizes the State Department of Agriculture to take certain actions for violations of the provisions of this bill, allowing hemp in certain commercial feed, and enacts civil penalties upon individuals for violating the provisions of the bill. Vice Chair Anderson submitted an amendment that allows research facilities to submit to the department an application for approval to conduct feeding studies that includes research on the use and impact of hemp products on non-equine livestock animals. Any research conducted must be in accordance with the requirements of federal law.
Do we have any questions? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to amend and do pass.
So moved.
I have a motion from the Vice Chair. Do I have a second? I have a second from Assemblymember Watts. Any comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? Okay, the amendment passes unanimously as amended, and I will give that floor statement to the Vice Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on.
Assembly Bill 349 establishes the Nevada Wildlife Conservation Program to support the preservation, protection, management, and restoration of wildlife and wildlife habitats, and requires Nevada's Department of Wildlife to administer the program. The bill also creates the Nevada Wildlife Conservation Program account in the State General Fund and directs how such funds are to be used. Lastly, AB 349 establishes the Board of Nevada Wildlife Conservation Program to consist of 5 members to advise the department on the expenditure of money in the account. Assemblyman O'Neill proposed an amendment that decreases the number of members on the board from 5 members to 3 members, and in a second friendly amendment, Tina Knapp proposed an amendment that expands the authority of the Board of Wildlife Commissioners to direct the use of money in the wildlife account.
Committee, do we have any questions? Seeing none, I will take a motion to amend and do pass.
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion from the vice chair. Do I have a second? I have a second from, is that Bilbray Axelrod? Any comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay? Okay, the bill passes unanimously. I will give the floor statement to the minority leader with Assemblymember DeLong as backup, please.
Assembly Bill 424 requires the State Board of Finance to issue not more than $13 million in general obligation bonds to fund certain environmental improvement and conservation projects included in the second phase of the Environmental Improvement Program for the Lake Tahoe Basin.
Committee, do we have any questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll take a motion to do pass. I have a motion from Assemblymember Bilbray Axelrod. Do I have a second? I have a second from Assemblymember DeLong. Any comments? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Okay, passes unanimously, and I will give the floor statement to Assemblymember DeLong.
Assembly Concurrent Resolution 5 expresses support for the Lake Tahoe Transportation Action Plan and for the funding of high-priority transportation projects in the Lake Tahoe Basin.
Committee, do we have any questions? Okay, seeing none, I will take a motion to do pass.
So moved.
I have a motion from the vice chair. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Assemblymember Considine. Any comments? Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard a lot of comments from my constituents with regards to the scope of the transportation plan as outlined. And based on those comments, I cannot support the resolution, so I'll be voting no.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other comments? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Nay. Okay, that, we have a nay from Assemblymember DeLong, and would the chair of the interim committee like the statement? Okay, so we will have the chair of the interim committee take that floor statement, and I will have Assemblymember Bilbray Axelrod be our backup. So with that, we will close our work session, and we will move on to our bill hearing, which is AB 313, which revises provisions relating to mining reclamation, and invite everyone who's presenting to please come forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Sarah Peters. I'm the representative for Assembly District 24, and glad to be here today to present to you Assembly Bill 313 related to reclamation of pit lakes. The first time I walked into this building, I offered expertise in environmental, regulatory, permitting, and compliance. And that was the day I realized that we needed more scientists in this building. I sat in a meeting with colleagues who were interested in bringing a piece of legislation to address natural resources and environmental issues. And the reception I received was, wow, sounds like we need to do something about that. We have to rely on people like you to bring this to this body, to discuss the issues in the environment that we are not experts on. I, shortly after that, maybe 3 years after that, decided to run for office. Today, we bring to you a policy decision to direct the interests of this state. We are not a body of scientists. We are a body of citizens. But it's imperative that we take care of our natural resources regardless, that we set the intention of state policy to what it is we want to see happen to those natural resources. Where do we want to go as a state? Who do we want to see use these resources? How do we want to see them used? What is the imperative of how they are used, and what's the responsibility of those who are using them and those who are regulating them? So today we are looking at pit lakes. I have an expert here, John Hatter, who also was a mentor of mine back before I decided to become an environmental engineer, to discuss some of the issues that we have seen with pit lakes and their interaction underwater or underground with groundwater, and as they remain in amorphous surface water as defined by state statute. Today we want to talk about defining impacts through policy and the relationship between water resources, surface, ground, and amorphous surface water, or ground surface expressions of, or surface expressions of groundwater. However we choose to say those in this state. I'm going to pass off the presentation, the remainder of the presentation, to John Hatter to talk a little bit about what this bill is intended to do and why it is important we have this conversation today.
For the record, John Hatter, Executive Director, Great Basin Resource Watch. I thank the committee for providing this opportunity for this hearing, and Chair Leslie Cohen for putting this on the schedule. Thank you very much. Let me start out with, that's our organization. We're a nonprofit in Nevada. We deal with mining. We'll move on. So as you can see here, basically this is requiring assume responsibility for reclamation of surface water and groundwater. So there's two major pieces of this bill conceptually, is to have reclamation of water and water systems included by statute, specifically mentioned in statute, and also the reporting, a transparency to the public on what's happening at mine sites regarding water systems and our ability to reclaim them. Specifically, there is the issue of what we consider an unreclaimed artifact or legacy of mining, which is mining pit lakes. And so this bill also specifically addresses this. And it puts an emphasis on avoidance of the formation of pit lakes. In our administrative code, there is an exemption process for open pits in general. But this is specific to mining pit lakes, and it only allows for two criterion to an exempt backfilling a pit lake to above the previous groundwater level. Either the exemption is either that through what we call clear and convincing evidence, so that's a legal term, sort of like that's 80, 90% kind of yes, we agree, that it's technically not feasible to do this without long-term management, indefinite management required to avoid groundwater contamination, degradation, because as you know, that's against state law to degrade groundwater. So if it's not possible, technically feasible, then that's one exemption. The other exemption allows for an economic argument. In some ways, it would become unprofitable for the mine plan to be able to do this. And there's, so those are the only two. So that is different than what we do now, which is much more open-ended. So this is a very specific directive that way. And it's a directive that says we want to avoid mining pit lakes. So that's why we're at the legislature, philosophically. Step back a second. So the primary objection to reclamation is to restore the environment to as close as possible to a pre-mining condition that will allow a post-mining use. Post-mining use of land, and this bill says also water and water systems. In order to reclaim and restore, it is necessary to understand the state of the environment prior to mining and evaluate how the mining operation has changed the environment. This means that determination of how land, surface water, and groundwater systems have been altered by mining operations and what actions are needed to restore and reclaim the land and water to a post-mining use. According to the Bureau of Land Management, quote, the ultimate objective of reclamation is ecosystem restoration, including the restoration of any natural vegetation, hydrology, that's where we're at today, and wildlife habitats affected by surface disturbance from the construction and operating facilities. In most cases, this means a condition equal to or closely approximating that which existed before the land was disturbed. Now, this is the standard for oil and gas operations, and we think it needs to be applied to hard rock mining as well, because the damages are similar in some ways. The state of Colorado recognizes the need to address water systems by requiring that, quote, disturbances to the prevailing hydrologic balance, so they're specifically addressing water here, of an affected land and the surrounding area, and to the quantity and quality of waters in the surface and groundwater systems, both during and after the mining operation and during reclamation, shall be minimized. So there's a recognition of that in the state of Colorado. What is your responsibility? So we're asking you as legislators to look into this. Surface and groundwater belong to the public. It's waters of the state. Water bodies such as human-made reservoirs and certainly mining pit lakes fall outside the Clean Water Act. It is our responsibility as Nevadans to protect these waters. By legislative declaration, NRS 445A.305, the legislature declares to maintain the quality of waters of the state consistent with public health and enjoyment, propagation and protection of terrestrial and aquatic life, operation of existing industries, pursuant of agriculture and economic development of the state. So our legislative, we have declared importance in this area. Also, to encourage methods of water collection and pollution control for all significant sources of water pollution. NRS 534020 also states it is the intention of the legislature by this chapter to prevent the waste of underground waters and pollution and contamination thereof, so forth. So that's why we're here, to address this. We think that AB 313 is in alignment with these NRS to restore water systems and to avoid degradation of large volumes of groundwater in pit lakes. Another example, also, in 2019, Great Basin Resource Watch appealed the water pollution control permit for the Mount Hope mine. In that appeal, we addressed a number of issues concerning pit lake quality, but we also asked the State Environmental Commission to provide a beneficial use for the pit lake, of water in the pit lake, which would be one of the largest in Nevada at Mount Hope. So here, from the testimony of the record, the commission generally indicated concerns regarding mining pit lakes. This is coming from the State Environmental Commission. And from that hearing, Commissioner Gans, and I quote, "These gigantic pit lakes scare me. If the public out there isn't asking questions, you're just wondering, what does it mean? They should, in my opinion, and he later stated, my opinion is that these pit lakes, or at least a lot of them, have been disasters." Commissioner Porta stated, quote, "I'm certainly concerned about pit lakes and water quality standards of the state." So clearly, the State Environmental Commission recognized there's an issue here to address. Furthermore, the view of the commissioners was that the matter of addressing pit lakes should be before you all as legislators. And I think it's summarized well in Commissioner Porta's statement. And some of which the appellant, and which I agree with their you know about the issues of water quality of pit lakes. But again, this is way above our permitting process. This is way above our pay grade that needs to be discussed later. And I would certainly encourage those discussions to take place at the legislative level and whatever comes after that to regulate. So here we are, you at the legislature to try to address some of these issues. So we have been directed. So my point being is that we looked at regulatory aspects of this, and so we're here at the legislature. A little bit of background on mining pit lakes. I'm sorry? Yep. As Assemblywoman Peters mentioned, this is a technical issue. There's stuff a lot of background sometimes is needed. I'll try to provide a little bit here. This is, what is dewatering? This is a term that's used a lot. So when the ore body is at least in part or totally below the water table, it's necessary to lower the water table artificially in that area so that the excavation operations can be dry. If you go to the beach and dig in the sand, water fills in. So dewatering is the process of pumping from within the pit and around the perimeter to artificially lower the water table, as represented by the schematic here. It's a common process. And this process is called dewatering. Once mining is completed, the dewatering pumps are turned off, and the groundwater is then drawn into the area that was quote-unquote dewatered, including the mining pit itself. By far, most of the water in the pit lake is from groundwater infiltrating back in. There is a very small amount from precipitation. Thus, at the end of mining and continuing for many years afterwards, there is a regional lowering of the water table significantly, which is illustrated in this map. So this is the Carlin trend. This shows the green area is a zone of lowering the water table by about 10 feet. And then the blue area shows the larger affected area. So there's a wide area that's affected just by the dewatering itself. Just explained that process. Effects on groundwater. The mining pit lakes are effectively impoundments which will exist indefinitely. Pit lakes create groundwater deficit in two ways. First is the filling. So that's the first step. The cavity has to be refilled in the process, and it takes water from what they call recharge. So recharge is the water that we can allocate. It's the available water in a basin. If you go above the recharge, you start decreasing the water table in the basin in general. So it will draw from that recharge, and sometimes it can take a long time to restore. Decades, sometimes centuries, long time frame. The filling rate initially can be much more rapid. It all depends on the geology and the fracturing. So it's not the same every time at every site, but it can vary quite a bit. For example, the Anaconda mine has a pit lake, which has been filling for 55 years, and it's almost full. A lot of them will take longer than that. The filling of the Round Mountain mine, pit lake. So here's a graph that's by contractors, paid for by the mining company. And so this is what they're showing here is when the pumps turn off, that's time zero. And they're showing the water that's going to be coming into the pit lake area. So notice that there's two different graphs, because there's three different graphs there that depend on what geology the water's coming from. But if you add them all up, you'll notice that in the first 30 years or so, the infiltration rate is much faster, particularly. Almost at least 3 times faster than long term. And gradually, the water coming in goes down, and then it levels off at a certain point. So schematically, what's going on is something like this. There's the pit lake. You've got water coming in from all directions. There's evaporation coming off the top, and it will draw from other things. Springs in the area, could be other surface waters, could be other users. So it draws from this continuously at a varying time rate. But this is this is true for most of the pit lakes. So in the case of some basins, the long-term tail, if I go back a second, that flat area, that represents the water that's lost to evaporation forever, as far as we know. And notice that this process doesn't really quite reach equilibrium 200 years. So it's a long process. This is going to be a big pit lake. Not all of them are going to take this long. This is a big one. One of the biggest ones would be Round Mountain. So in this particular case, you've got a lot of evaporation. Long-term, the evaporation is going to continue, and it's going to continue to draw water into it. Nevada's an arid place. Evaporation rate is really high. So these pit lakes act like a large diameter well, pumping indefinitely, as far as we know. That consumptive loss from evaporation is loss of the basin forever, and the mining companies are required to get a water right for that evaporative loss, accounted for in that way. And collectively, in northern Nevada, generally, all of the evaporation from all of the mining pit lakes existing anticipated, Great Basin Resource Watch has estimated to be 10,000 to 11,000 acre-feet of water. This can be significant for some basins. The Maggie Creek example is that you've got a perennial yield, that's what PY means, so that's the recharge, available water on an annual basis, is about 4,000 acre-feet, but the two largest pit lakes will remove 60 acre-feet every year. So in that case, it's removing a big piece of the available water. Now, that's not the same for all basins. Some basins, it's going to be much smaller. It's going to vary. My point is, it can be significant, and so it's important that we address it. Let's see. And then there is the other issue. What happens to the water once the pit lake is full and it's full, then you've got all these mining pit lakes around. Again, we use the same data set. Thank you to the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection, Bureau of Mining Reclamation Regulation. They provided the data to calculate how much water would eventually end up on all these mining pit lakes. And our estimate came out to about 1.5, maybe to 1.7 million acre-feet of water, 49 to 559 billion gallons. And so the balloons there kind of give you a sense of the scale. So this is a lot of water. It's roughly almost 3 times the annual use in Las Vegas. So we're talking about a lot of water will end up on these mining pit lakes. And that pit lake you're looking at there, that's the Lone Tree Pit Lake. That was taken, I'm thinking it's around 2009, 2010. So there's a lot of water. There's a permanent loss of evaporation, and there's a lot of water in the pit lakes, themselves. So one step in addressing the evaporative loss is certainly to backfill the pits, because once you backfill them above the water table, then you're no longer going to have this large evaporative loss. So it decreases that permanent loss over time. That's an important takeaway on this one. Now I'm going to say a little bit about water quality at pit lakes. These can vary significantly, but they can be very problematic. Typically, what we observe is that, and this is based on the actual pit lakes that are out there, is that the water quality in the pit lake is of lower water quality than the surrounding groundwater. Remember, that water that's in the pit lake came from the groundwater, largely. So as we see it, the mining pit lakes are actually decreasing water quality. It's not considered degradation, but it's not considered degradation because pit lakes are defined as a surface water. And so once the groundwater crosses that barrier into the surface, it's no longer groundwater anymore, and so then it's no longer groundwater degradation. But the water quality we're losing water quality is the big point there. And it can vary. The Lone Tree Pit Lake had very bad water quality very early on and has been treated continuously since then. Some are not so bad. Here's an example of the Pit Lake McCoy Cove. I picked this one because I feel like it's kind of maybe in the middle a little bit. It's not as bad as Lone Tree, but it's not necessarily one of the better ones. So the idea here is if you look at this analysis, the McCoy Cove Pit Lake, the saltiness, we call it saltiness, which is TDS, means total dissolved solids, is about 1,700 parts per million. And then the manganese is about 1 part per million. The surrounding groundwater, you can see, is of much better water quality. This is our point. We're taking water that may be usable for a lot of things, and we're making it less usable. The NDEP Profile 1 standard for EPAs is our groundwater drinking water standard is 1,000 ppm for TDS, and that's just a standard. That is not a standard for a pit lake, okay? That's a standard that we apply to the, maybe apply to the aquifer, okay? Pit lakes have a separate kind of water standard quality process, which is based on the potential to harm terrestrial wildlife, human safety, that sort of thing. It's a different kind of process. But just wanted to point out that this is the water quality issue. Again, it varies a lot. The Bald Mountain mine, for example, they don't have what we call reactive ore. So if the area has reactive ore, sometimes you get really bad water. That was the case in the Pit Lake at Lone Tree. There was reactive ore, which is combination of the air, water, and oxygen together, and it starts generating acid. And it's really hard to stop once it gets started. And that got really bad there. Bald Mountain, on the other hand, they don't have that problem. It's probably one of the better mining pit lakes. So it can vary a lot. However, even at the Bald Mountain mine, even their pit lake is of lower water quality than the surrounding groundwater, as far as we can tell from the monitoring reports supplied by the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection, Division of the Bureau of Mining Regulation and Reclamation. And again, we thank them for the data. So that's another thing to keep in mind in terms of water quality. So this comes back. Okay, so we've talked about evaporative losses. Now we have this issue of access. So we've got a lot of water in these mining pit lakes. How do we get to it? If you wanted to use that water directly, could you use it? Problem is that the pit lakes and the pits are not reclaimed in general. And there is a statute in the NRS regarding pit lakes over 200 acres. There's a possibility that those could have public access if everyone agrees. Although that statute hasn't really changed the reclamation practice that we see for mining pit lakes. So in general, the practice is that pit lakes are fenced off or berms are constructed around the perimeter to keep people and terrestrial life out. For example, the reclamation requirements for the Cortez Hills mining pit, as stated in the EIS, was post-mining safety barriers, e.g. berms, fencing, or other appropriate barriers, would be installed peripheral at the crest of each pit based on the predicted wall stability and the time of closure, to control access by people, livestock, most wildlife. Pit ramps will be barricaded to prevent entrance. Therefore, the water in the pit lake in Powman is effectively kind of consumed. It's not accessible. Now, that could be different. A similar quote exists in if you look at reclamation permits issued by the state of Nevada, you see similar language. The idea is that these things are not safe, and we want to keep people out of them. So if you want to directly access that water, let's say you wanted to get a water right and pump some water from it and use it, well, you couldn't really easily access. It's a problem. It's not part of the reclamation plan. So that's one issue that we raise, is that even though the water's still in the basin, how do you get to it? It's kind of one of the issues that we raise. This is not about water rights. This is about access of public waters. Since another way that someone might be able to try to access the water in a pit lake is say, okay, we're not allowed in or prevented from getting in. What if we sink a well outside of the perimeter of the pit lake and pump on that? Can we draw some of the water in the pit lake and use it? Yes, that's certainly a possibility. You get a water right for that. Problem is, what if the pit lake is of lower quality than the groundwater? Then you're going to be drawing poorer water quality into the groundwater. In some cases, that could be a violation of state law if it's bad enough. So that practice is weak. It's not really a method which is often available. So there's a problematic aspect of trying to access the water that way as well. So the two ways you directly access the water are almost closed down. And so we feel like this is part of the problem. So in summary, AB 313, we feel it's needed to turn attention generally towards restoring water systems, including groundwater and flow patterns, as best as possible to a pre-mining condition, to better address the water loss of mining pit lakes, to avoid the access to public water due to pit lakes, to avoid lowering groundwater quality from pit lakes, and to increase transparency in the public. So as I mentioned before, if we backfill these, then we don't have this problem with access, because the water is now really part of the groundwater system. So when you backfill a pit lake, this is what happens. This is what happens sometimes. The sidewalls collapse. This is the danger issue I mentioned before. When you backfill a pit lake, this schematic kind of illustrates some conditions. So in the upper corner there, you've got no backfilling, and you have a flow through. Water's flowing through. That doesn't happen most in Nevada. Mostly in Nevada, what you see is on the right side, scenario B, where water's coming in, but you get increased salinity and maybe worse if there's reactive ore. What we're saying is we want to backfill, and so with backfill, the water will come into the backfill and will exit the backfill. So it will be this continuous and it'll be part of the water system. Can that cause groundwater degradation? Yes, we've got to be careful about that. We just can't do this willy-nilly. It's possible that the water flowing out could be a problem. That's why there's an exemption allowed in the bill to say, well, if this is a problem, long-term, cannot be actively managed in the short term, will require an indefinite management problem, then, yeah, you need to get an exemption. Can't do it. Now, I want to point out that this is being done. Backfilling is being done some places. So we do applaud those companies that are looking at this. The Bald Mountain Mine, for example, in Nevada is doing this in one of their pits, in one of their pits. The top pit, what they call it, they're backfilling that pit because it would form a small pit lake. I'll just finish this one thing and then, yeah. My apologies for being too long-winded than I may have said earlier. I did the best here with the time. Well, I appreciate that. But let me just mention that that the objective for backfilling this pit is to avoid groundwater depletion. That's their objective. That's in their application to the state of Nevada. So they're trying to address this issue, and in the process of backfilling it, also in that same permit, it indicates that they have a plan for how to select the best material for backfill to avoid the groundwater degradation. So our point is that this is about new mine projects that look at the situation in ahead. If a company knows that they're going to have to have a plan for backfilling a pit that would have a pit lake, develop an approach to the mine plan to minimize the moving of materials, to reduce, to make it more economical, and to avoid this problem of down gradient degradation, which could occur. But if it cannot be avoided, then there's the opportunity for an exemption. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may walk folks through the conceptual amendment, I believe you've all had ample time to read Assembly Bill 313. It's in its first introduction, but we have recommended a couple of changes in this conceptual amendment. First of all, as much as we'd love to see the backfill of historic pits that are potentially degrading and using unnecessarily amounts of water, we will remove those requirements. And instead, you'll see in Section 3 of the conceptual amendment, require the Division of Minerals and Division of Environmental Protection to prepare a report submitted to the Interim Committee on Natural Resources to include but not limited to impacts of pit lakes on water, including evaporative losses, impacts to surface and groundwater, including hydrologic impacts, impacts to pit lakes and on current and future land and water use, and in consultation with the Division of Wildlife, the analysis of impact to wildlife. In Section 4, we talk about terrestrial and aquatic wildlife, and my intention would be that would also be included in Section 3, subsection C, of the conceptual amendment. So we would remove those retroactive language and include this report to the interim committee to keep this conversation going, to talk about what the historic impact of mining has done to affect our landscape, and help drive solutions to that problem if problems are identified. And then changes to Section 4 would include removing the requirement for a review of reclaiming the pit lake in a major modification to an existing permit of a pit lake or of a mine operation. Remove the obligation to review pit lake and the renewal of a water pollution control permit. We removed some language related to clear and convincing evidence, and left in there the preponderance of evidence that the backfilling the open pit would result in undue hardship on the operator by requiring a reasonable mine plan to be unprofitable. And then allowing for that economic justification to be considered in the arguments for reclamation or not reclamation of a pit lake. So that, and then Section 4, would require the Division of Wildlife to submit recommendations regarding analysis of mine impacts to terrestrial and aquatic wildlife and habitats, which right now there is an opportunity for the Division of Wildlife to weigh in on on mining projects, but there is no authority for them on those projects. So we'd like for them to weigh in on what could authority look like for them to review projects. And with that, I believe we stand for questions.
Thank you. I have a question from Vice Chair Anderson.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation, and also for the PowerPoint. It helped me visualize much more and understand to a much deeper level. And actually, one of my questions is from one of those PowerPoints, I believe it was slide 6, where you spoke of the varying sizes that are kind of created, it sounds like. So I guess, is there any sort of language in the proposed bill and or amendment that mentions how the different sizes could be actually considered, or is there anything that clarifies of just the varying degrees that could occur because of the very different ways that mines are done?
Sarah Peters for the record, and thank you for the question. I know this is a lot of information to digest. It took me years of university to get through a lot of what you were just presented in the last 20 minutes or so. So those are considerations that are reasonable to be considered in the regulatory process, right, through the permitting process. So right now in the statute, and we're not suggesting to change that, there is a 200-acre requirement on pit lakes. We are not suggesting that that be eliminated in this revision. But that is the starting point right now for consideration of reclamation.
Thank you, because I was just like, there's no way we could make a decision as to the different sizes. So thank you very much in clarifying that would be through the regulatory process. And then again, looking at the bill, I just want to make sure that I'm reading this correctly, that the language that is deleted from section 12.8, I believe it is, where it basically defines the pit lake itself. It's on page 11 of the language, has actually just been moved up to section 2, so that way we know it right away. And so as a teacher, it's kind of nice to be aware of the definition early in the bill, I guess. So just wanted to verify that. I see you shaking your head, so I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes, John Hatter, for the record, Assemblywoman Anderson, yes, that's just kind of putting it in what I thought was a better place.
Perfect. And then my last question actually has to do with, I believe this is still language that is in the bill, although it's also mentioned on the amendment. It has to do with section 4.1, and it has to do with getting rid of the permanent wetlands. So we don't want permanent wetlands, or I guess I'm confused by that, because sometimes there's an idea that permanent wetlands are a good thing and sometimes there's a bad thing. So if you could kind of go into that idea of why would the permanent wetland be a negative idea?
John Hatter for the record. Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Anderson. What can happen in a situation like, we do not want to have a wetland created. What can happen is that you can get a situation where the water rises and falls. And it happens a lot in Nevada. Water tables change a lot, especially in this case. So we want to have the backfill so that water doesn't wet the surface. Because what can happen with that process of rising and wetting the surface is it can allow oxygen to come in contact with water and potentially reactive ore and increase, and also there's increased evapotranspiration and more evaporation water coming off with, and so it actually can create more of a toxic wetland than you would have otherwise. So we generally recommend not have that occur.
Thank you so much.
Assemblymember Brown May.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this presentation. I'm going to ditto the slideshow. Very helpful. I do have a couple of questions. I'm going to go back to college. Can you talk a little bit about backfilling the pit to the water table, right? So we're talking about backfilling pits where possible, to the water table so that we don't have wetlands, not completely to the top. Can you talk through that just for a little bit?
John Hatter for the record. Thank you for the question. Assemblywoman Brown May. It's kind of a fine point. Yes, we don't want to have wetlands. So the idea is if you look at this picture here, you'll see what that illustrates is the backfill is kind of on the same level as the water table. We want it to be above, significantly above, so that as the water table rises and falls seasonally, that it doesn't create a wetting of the surface. So definitely well below. Is that?
Sarah Peters for the record. So this is also engineered, right? So the regulatory permitting process, and including the federal process, requires a significant amount of investment in engineering for what closure looks like, what operations look like, and then what closure looks like. So to set the standard of no wetlands and backfill to at least the water table, that gives some container for how to engineer that closure. And then the hydraulic modeling and other modeling for the geochemistry would occur, and that would drive the final engineering process to what those expectations and standards are for closure. And then those closure, so in the state of Nevada, we permit on closure. So our division holds a permit that says, here's how you have committed to operate and thus close this operation. And that closure that is what we would hold them to, is the standards that were provided in that closure document. Sometimes things go different than you expect, right? You run into geochemistry that you didn't expect, or you have water quality that was less than the standard that you expected it to be when you get there. And in those cases, there are functionalities to address those issues, but those already exist, and those are part of the regulatory process. This just sets the parameters. The expectation of the state of Nevada, as given by the legislature, would be that no wetlands occur and there's no surface water expression.
Thank you. Follow up? Chair. Thank you. That was excellent. Thank you. Excellent. And I appreciate that really good, clear explanation of what the expectation is. So there are exceptions now, currently. And as if I'm the mining operator and I'm going to put the plan in place, I can apply for an exception currently, right? And then this would then add into those exceptions environmentally and economically reasonable standards for what the expectation is. Who does the exceptions now, and how does that look differently in this bill?
Sarah Peters for the record. Thanks for that question. Okay, so the Nevada Administrative Code has been promulgated. It is Nevada Administrative Code 519A250. This is related to the exemptions of open pits and rock faces from requirements. An operator may request in writing to the division that the division grant an exception, to the requirements for reclamation for open pits and rock faces which may not be feasible to reclaim. And then it sets a couple of standards for which the division shall base its determination on. Those include topography of the site, geology and stability of the site, time required to complete reclamation, consumption of resources required to complete reclamation, potential adverse environmental impacts to the quality of air and water associated with the activities for reclamation, and future access to mineral resources. These are set in the regs, right? What we're suggesting here is that we emphasize it at the legislature, that we care about what happens to our water and where our water goes, and that needs to be expressly restricted, right, in the regulatory process to be defined and with proof of evidence that you cannot meet those quality standards under the current conditions of either the mine or the economy. So we wouldn't remove that economic argument. We would just require that the burden of proof be a little bit more significant so that we have transparency on why it's not meeting those standards and what's the effect to the state's water quality of not meeting those standards.
All right, thanks. I have a question from Assemblymember Urick.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hatter, too, for the multiple trips to my office to help me understand as I learn about all of what's going on here. With the Chair's permission, I'm going to ask two questions, and for the sake of time, I'll just put them out and then you can respond. One is stemming from conversations that we had in my office, and I've heard you kind of highlight these issues today. The concerns, one of the concerns about these pit lakes is the danger that's posed to the public. And it seems like that's one of the reasons that in Section 4 now that we're requiring to backfill as part of the consideration. But then I look in Section 12, and you're reducing the predicted filled surface area of where before you had to provide public access at greater than 200 acres, and you're narrowing that down now to 85 acres. And that seems to be contradictory, and it might be my own understanding of this, but if we're kind of trying to backfill these and there's this danger to the public, why would we require public access to what used to be surface areas that would encompass 200 acres and narrow that down to 85? So if you can help me understand that, I would be grateful. And then the second question that I have is in Section 4, and it's on the amendment of 2B. And it says for the exceptions to do this, that by preponderance of the evidence, backfilling of an open pit would result in undue hardship on the operator by requiring a reasonable mine plan to be unprofitable. My question is, what's a reasonable mine plan? Who makes that determination? At what point in the process does that occur?
John Hatter for the record. Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Urick. Good questions. We are not, I don't know if Assemblywoman Peters mentioned or not, but we are not changing the 200 to 85. We originally proposed that, and we stepped back from it. Don't think it's to step back from it. And let me also point out that that provision doesn't require public access. What it really requires is that there be a consultation amongst landowners that are on landowners around the pit lake as to whether they would be open to it. So it doesn't. It doesn't require public access at all. If any of the landowners said they didn't want to have public access, then it's off the table. So it's a very soft. It's not really a requirement. It's a very kind of soft in the legislature. And as a result, in my opinion, as a result, there is no reclamation. That is not acted on. We don't have public access in general. Like I said, the reclamation is usually to prevent the public. So first of all, we dropped the changing from 200 to 85. Originally, I had thought, well, if we're going to leave this provision in, if in fact a company wanted to reclaim a pit lake to provide public access, let's include a little bit smaller ones too, because 200 is pretty big. But we ended up just dropping that. I think we're willing to drop that. And the second question was, yes, reasonable mine plan, right, the reasonable mine plan question. So we don't, the company, my understanding is, and people here might talk about that from the industry, is you look at a site, you say, okay, what makes sense to us? what's a mine plan that's gonna be profitable? What's a, you know, what makes sense? Do we have to, is the state of Nevada requiring us to do things that are ridiculous? That, you know, and so reasonable is something that a mine plan that a company would propose in general. And so that's why, not necessarily outside of their realm of engineering. Now, I will point out, though, that these are new mine plans. So if you know going into it that there is a higher bar on reclamation, then the engineering mine plan should address that. For example, if you're backfilling, if you know if you want to backfill a pit, there are processes where you can do sequential backfilling, so that, well, okay, we're not going to take all of the waste rock out of the pit. We're going to leave some of it in there and use it for the backfilling process. Things like that. That's reasonable to do, as opposed to something that a company would as opposed to a mine plan where the company would be considered unreasonable and then therefore unprofitable. I don't know if that really tried to address it a little bit. Maybe Sarah, if you haven't.
Yeah, I just want to go back to, sorry, Sarah Peters for the record, back to the administrative code that exists today. In this section, the division shall base its determination of the feasibility of reclaiming open pit and rock faces on the technological and economic practicability of achieving a safe and stable condition suitable for the productive post-mining land use. I think the same question could be asked there. Who determines economic practicability? And that is at the determination of the regulators, right? So they're the ones who are reviewing the proposed mine plans and making these decisions. And this bill suggests that they have the authority to do that, determining the reasonable mine plan and the potential for profitability. Or actually unprofitable, right? So that's asking, is it too technologically and economically unfeasible to reclaim this property while remaining profitable? And I think that that's the interest of the mining operator, right, or investors. They make that determination. What is reasonably profitable and what's reasonably not profitable, and what drives that? They have enormous costs. Related to the operation, related to the social licensing of being in a community, you know, and that drives the economics of mining industry. I don't think that this suggests that there's too much of an additional step to what they already do under the existing administrative code.
Thank you. I appreciate the attempt to answer that. And I would just say that, I mean, my concern is that this could impose a significant burden on one of our state's major economic drivers. I'm just going to share that concern. That I would encourage that probably be defined a little bit better to help everybody make sure they understand this is what's reasonable, what are the factors to consider, probably a little bit more than even what we're seeing in the regs, who makes that decision and when, to ensure that our mining operators and the people that are making these investments, that they have the opportunity to understand what will be required to make that determination as to whether or not it's economical to be here and conduct business. So I would encourage continued work with industry on that.
Are you suggesting to include that in the statute?
I don't know exactly where it needs to go, but definitely some clearer direction on it, because it might be me, right? I'm an attorney. My legal mind is looking at this going, oh, there's a lot of room for slipperiness in here. And I would just like to see, again, I think that my concern is that this is going to impose a potentially a significant burden on our mining operations in Nevada, and I think some clarity on that would help.
John had it for the record, yeah, it's good, thank you very much for the suggestion, Sutherland and Urick. Yeah, we definitely, language could be adjusted. I mean, I was thinking also that in the rulemaking process, in the administrative code, they may address that as well. The standard of preponderance of evidence is more likely than not, so it's not an enormously high bar. This bill is not intended to strangle the industry by any means, but if a company can reasonably afford to do it, that's kind of where we're at. I was mostly concerned about smaller operators, that they might be burdened more so. The larger operators, I think, have more disposable ability to make the extra step if that's what it takes. So I was mostly concerned about smaller operators. Thank you very much.
Assemblymember DeLong.
Thank you, Chair. I'd first like to acknowledge Assemblywoman Peters' opening remarks. I think would be great to have a scientist and a permitting expert for the mining industry in the legislature. I also appreciate you pointing out NAC 519.8-250, because that's an important regulation, and NDEP passed that with the understanding that they have statutory authority to require those activities. So most of what I see in this bill is already covered in this regulation, which means they have statutory authority already to do it. So my first question is, why didn't you just go to NDEP and ask them about implementing a regulatory process rather than a statutory process? And the second part of my question has to do with the amendment, which I think definitely muddles the bill by adding in a bunch of terms that are highly technical as it relates to the criteria on how to comply, and has to do with clear and convincing evidence, preponderance evidence, undue hardship on the operator. And my colleague has already brought up a reasonable mine plan. Are you planning on having those defined in statute, which is where the legislative body really should be weighing in on that?
John Haddon for the record. Number one, thank you very much for the question, Assemblyman DeLong. It's a good question. What this is legislative direction to the agency, in my view. Pit lakes need to be dealt with in a more overt way than we are now. We don't want to see them, as many of them. We want to see reclamation. The agency does consider a lot of things in the administrative code, but this bill says there's only two ways that you can get an exemption: groundwater degradation problem or the economic analysis. So it's actually more restrictive in that way, and it provides a direction and emphasis, as Assemblywoman Peters says, that this is important. It's more important. My experience in doing this is we just don't see these bodies dealt with. That's kind of I mean, I'm not saying that the agency's not doing their job. They're doing their job fine. It's just that there isn't an emphasis. And we have talked to the agency about this, about trying to address it regulatorily. The State Environmental Commission said, go to the legislature. That's why I'm here. That's why we're here. Because we were thinking maybe we don't have to go to the legislature. But that was the direction from the commission, which would oversee any kind of regulatory changes at that point. Maybe the question we asked wasn't the right one. I don't know. But that was the guidance that we got from the State Environmental Commission at that time. The language, some of the specific language, is to sort of set a little bit of a bar on how well the evidence has to be, how much depth there has to be to it. Like I said, my understanding is that clear and convincing evidence, which was recommended to us, is like an 80%, 90% a bar. It's not the highest bar in law, but the highest bar it's one of the higher bars in terms of administrative law like this. So the idea is that we want to see some real data. The preponderance of evidence is a little lower bar, but it still suggests that more likely than not is the idea there. So there's some analysis that the public is available to the public as well as to the agency. Now, the agency clearly makes the decision at the end of the day, but we think it's important for the public to see what this analysis is. We're talking about water here. This is our water. This isn't just anything. And so that's why we think the bar needs to be a little bit higher, because this is water that we need, water that we use, we drink, we live on. So we think that my feeling is that there needs to be a little higher bar, sort of protection of our water resources, and there needs to be a justification that the public can see. Now, doesn't mean that again, I'm not saying that the agency hasn't been doing a job. I think they're doing fine that way. It's just I think that legislative direction, we think it needed to sort of push this along further, and that was the recommendation that we got. Thank you very much for the question.
A quick follow-up, Chair, thank you. So you said there are two criteria that would have to be cleared in order to not backfill a pit that would have a pit lake. One is the geochemistry one, which is a very technical and very site-specific issue. Just for this hearing, not going to go into that. But the second is the economic one. Is the state going to determine what an acceptable profit is?
John Hatter, for the record, I presume so. That's up to the people. What we put the language, I put the language I was thinking of, this is a hard question. How do we deal with this economic thing? How much profit is reasonable? How much is not reasonable? So we kept try to keep it simple. Profitable or not profitable? I think that language is open to some discussion and maybe how can we adjust this, but I think that's up to the people. If the legislature, if you as legislators feel like there's some specifics that need to be inserted in there, then maybe that's true too. That's your job. But it's up to the people in my view. Thank you.
Hate to put you on the spot, but if it's going to be up to the state to set the profit level, why isn't it in the legislation?
We don't have the expertise to define a reasonable mine plan for every circumstance. Sarah Peters, for the record.
Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, it's good to see you, and thank you for coming and visiting with me and explaining a little bit more about what you're trying to accomplish. I actually, Chair, if it would be okay, I have a question for if NDEP is here in the room, and then I had a couple questions for Mr. Hatter.
So they're here. I'm not sure if they're in here or in overflow.
Oh,
They're here. Would it be okay if can you ask them questions during neutral, just so we have more room?
Oh,
So we're
okay.
not moving, is
Sure,
it okay?
thank
And that way
you.
we don't have to move the
No
presenters
problem.
off of the
No
microphones for
problem.
now.
Thank you for that. So, Mr. Hatter, you made mention about the commission said to come here to the legislature. Did you work with the regulators, though, in regards to maybe just the language of this bill? I'm wondering what kind of engagement you have with the regulators in trying to craft language, like what they are doing, what they're not doing, maybe where there's some gaps. And then I have another one to that.
John Hatter, for the record, thank you for the question. We had talked to the NDEP quite a while ago about wanting to address mining pit lakes. And the main emphasis they had indicated to us is it's going to be hard to address existing mine plans. You've got to look at people starting out fresh. And we wanted to address existing mine plans initially, but how do you do that? It's a tough one. So that's why we said, well, if there's maybe the study is a way to kind of see what we can do about those existing ones. And I think that we had a number of meetings about the Lone Tree Pit Lake and so forth. I think my sense was at the time is that their agency recognized that pit lakes can be a problem, but that probably any kind of regulation would have to address new operations.
Okay, and Chair? Oh,
Sorry, I do have a response as Sarah Peters, for the record. So we drafted initial language that I sent over to NDEP for an initial, how does it look? Is this feasible? Can you do this? And got a response back from them directing some of what you see in front of you. We initially were talking about what water's beneficial use should look like, but that kind of draws this parallel between what the Division of Water Resources does and what the Bureau of Mining Reclamation does. And right now, with the way it's set up, that was not a reasonable thing to do. So we did. We took some direction from NDEP on what was reasonable and how to ensure that this could be promulgated into regulations and enforced.
thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. And then just kind of to launch from there, was there any kind of collaboration with mine operators to come up with maybe ideas or solutions about your concerns, about maybe have a collaborative effort, rather doing a bill together in this respect, rather than a bill that comes at the industry? Did you work with mine operators on this?
John Hatter for the record. Again, thank you for the question. Assemblywoman Hanson. We set up site visits to mines all the time. We usually have 1 or 2 of them a year, and we talk to them about mining pit lakes all the time. So they know it's out there. We've talked about, what could you do, what could you not do? So we've had some of those kind of more casual conversations. I did meet with, at one point, with the Nevada Mining Association folks, and it seems like there were just fundamental things we made difficult to agree on, but nevertheless, we're open to, I'm certainly open to that. Out of this process, can we get success in dealing with mining pit lakes? I'd like to see that. But I think most of our conversations have been more on those site visits and kind of a sense of understanding of if you're backfilling it, why are you backfilling it? What is your perspective on mining pit lakes? What do you think about beneficial uses? Could they be a recreational source at some point? Could there be a use for them, and so forth? So we've had some of those discussions. But in terms of crafting specific language, I mean, it was more general like that from my point of view.
Thank you, Chair, for the indulgence. So in that, though, no conversations about, so what would this economically look like? Them being the industry experts in what they do, and then you having the concerns that you do, there was no collaboration about, well, if we propose this, how would that affect you? Or them having conversations with you to say, well, this would be something that we could do or we can't do. There was no kind of conversations to that effect about how would this affect their operations in general? Not just the concerns about pit lakes, but if you're going to remediate it or rehabilitate it, what does that look like for them?
John Hatter for the record. Thank you for the question. Well, basically just cost, the only response I recall I can think of and specifically is just it's going to cost more in general. And so prefer not to do it. We can hear what industry has to say about that, but I mean, I think we didn't sit down and dice out language in particular. I mean, obviously, I think that one of the issues is particularly with this bill, we're talking about new mine plans, and how would you design the mine differently to address backfill? And I've had some conversations about how that could be done, but in terms of the actual economics of it, no specific numbers. It's a conversation we need to have. Thank you very much.
Assemblymember Gurr.
Thank you, Chair. Most of this discussion is way above my pay grade anyway, but have you, this bill and the amendment looks like it will significantly impact the length of time it takes to get a permit in the state of Nevada. Have you talked or worked with the federal regulators and discussed how much emphasis this will have on what they do? And is this not a little duplicative of the federal laws?
John Hatter for the record. Well, this is about water. Because this is not reclaiming, this is not backfilling all pits. This is looking at backfilling pits that would have a pit lake in them. So this is about water. And the federal government does not address waters of the state in this way. Yes, they look at water quality issues. They have to address what's considered undue and unnecessary degradation. There are some, they do look at land aspect, but this is about how do we avoid the loss of water in pit lakes and the loss of the access. So no, they do not address those issues in the NEPA process directly. They do address loss of water some, but it's really left up to the state and the state regulators to address. That's from my understanding.
Sarah Peters for the record. A lot of the technical aspects that would go into the justification process is driven by the NEPA process. And so it is not duplicative, it's just reusing it for the state's purpose rather than the federal government's purpose.
Thank you, Chair, but does that answer my question about how much more time it'll add to the permitting process?
Sarah Peters for the record. Each permit doesn't come out in a defined period of time. It takes what it takes to get through the process. There are suggested timeframes, but we know that certain NEPA permits and EISs take much longer than others, and it's just driven by how much science can you get done and how reasonable can you, how much time it takes to reasonably engineer a project, right? So I think it's impossible to know how much more time it could add because the process is still is driven by what is required to meet the criteria set by the federal and state governments. However, most permitting processes are driven by the federal timelines, not the state timelines.
Assemblymember Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this bill. My question is kind of along the lines of permitting as well. From my understanding, you can start planning for mines for like a decade. So, and you're figuring out all the engineering, all of the, everything that you need to do along those lines, including the engineering for closure. And I'm just seeing that the permit issue date is January of 2024. So I don't know where that permit would fall in that timeline when you're planning to mine. So does that date work because the closure planning is late in the process? Or I guess I'm just checking on that permit timing because I don't know where this permit would fall in on that timeline.
That's a great question, and I think we are more than willing to address the timeline criteria in the proposed legislation. However, there is an existing requirement, right, to make an evidential proof that you cannot reasonably reclaim an open pit. So the burden is not expected to be significantly more, right? I think that there are aspects around the profitability and maybe reasonable mine plan language and delineating that out. But you're right, we probably should tie it to when those regulations are promulgated because you can't define most of this process outside of having those regulations in place and those authorities in place to help drive those decisions.
So, we know that we've got mining going on in surrounding states. What's going on in surrounding states? Are they doing anything like this with their pit mines?
In California, they have a prohibition on pit lakes, so all pit lakes must be, or all potential pit lakes must be backfilled. There are other issues around how we, in particular, address the water interactions. Other states deal with water in a different way than we do, and that defines some of the way they regulate pit lakes. We'll let Mr. Hatter go ahead and describe some of those.
John Hatter for the record. Thank you for the question. Pit lakes seem to be kind of a quandary. We have looked at a lot of different states, and other than California that requires a backfill, it's usually kind of a case-to-case basis. Again, as I mentioned with Colorado, they do have in statute, they do have in their regulations addressing hydrologic balance. So their regulations say you need to look at water systems in some way. And I had a number of years ago, had talked to a number of people, regulators from other states, and I say, well, you know, if the water's bad, we treat it. So it's not something that is universally kind of dealt with. So I think that here in Nevada, we will have a lot of pit lakes, maybe more than a lot of other states. We have a lot of, because it's dry, a lot of these pit lakes will have a lot of water evaporation loss. That could be another driver for this process. So there isn't a lot out there other than specifically on this. So I do think that this is a step forward that we'd be taking.
Okay, and you actually, during your presentation, you mentioned the treatment. Can you give us a little more information about, what treatments are being done? What's the aim to a treat? What is the aim when there's treatment being done? Is that just to keep the surrounding water from getting impacted? Is that to make that water usable? And who's doing that treatment? Who's paying for that treatment?
This is John Hatter for the record. You mean here in Nevada?
Yes.
There is the regulation, the NAC code 529 does set what is considered groundwater degradation and what is the standard that would be used for a mining pit lake, and that is that the pit lake must not have the potential to affect human health and to harm avian and terrestrial wildlife, so the potential too. So there is a Profile 3 standards that the agency uses internally to judge whether that potential exists or not. So it's not like it's not like a drinking water standard, it's a bit different than that. In the case of the Lone Tree Pit, it became very acidic very quickly. And any birds that would light on that water would be in serious jeopardy. And so there's the Migratory Bird Act, which also does, it's a federal regulation, does require at very minimum that the acid, the pit lake needs to be neutralized. At the Lone Tree, it was a serious situation. They at one point added caustic soda very early on because to try to immediately reduce the acidity. Caustic soda is also known as lye. Mostly the treatment is using lime, which is the problem with lime is that it doesn't dissolve that well in water, and so it has a tendency to settle out. I know at Lone Tree they've also been treating it with sodium carbonate. For a while, Newmont was doing that, which was actually effective in understanding how much acid was coming into the lake. Unfortunately, it has long-term implications too. So in the case of the Sleeper Pit Lake, which is another pit lake, which I didn't talk about here, which was very bad initially, has actually come around quite a bit. So it's possible that some of these pit lakes could become better. I believe there was there was a fair bit of organic matter that was added to that pit lake as well. Perhaps the agency knows better all the treatments that were done there. The idea is to add carbon and try to get the chemical reactions to get the acid and sort of change the chemical characteristics of the pit lake. Not easy, it's a complicated process. Once you have a pit lake has that kind of acid generation, it's very difficult sometimes can be difficult to predict what's the best way to do. If you don't have a situation like Lone Tree, like one that's not has reactive ore, it's mostly a matter of increased saltiness and trying to ensure that there aren't constituents in there that could cause that harm. But mostly it's neutralization. Once it becomes less acidic, a lot of the problematic toxins will precipitate, drop out and become part of the sediments. That's a big piece of it. Other additions are possible as well. So I mean, these things can be treated. If it's a terminal lake, as I mentioned, where there's no water flow in, then it's just a matter of in-pit treatment. However, if it does have outflow and you've got bad water, then that water has to be intercepted and treated. This is the case, for example, the Thacker Pass mine has been permitted. It's a lithium mine. That would be, their pit lake would be a flow-through, be one of the few flow-through pit lakes in Nevada, probably. And in that one, they determined that the backfill would cause problems long-term, and so the agency had said, rightfully in our opinion, that we're not going to let you mine below the water table for now anyway. That's their permit doesn't allow that. But if they're able to submit a management plan that avoids groundwater degradation, then that possibly they could go below the water table. And that will probably require intercepting the water and treating it in a way. Depending upon the toxin, the treatment's a little bit different.
Okay, and I'm sorry, as quickly as possible, because I want to get us moving on to support, opposition, et cetera. Who's responsible for doing the treatment?
John Hatter for the record. Well, I mean, ultimately the mining company does it, but it's the agency that says you've got to do this. That's our regulatory agency. This is.
Thank you. And then very briefly, please, Assemblyman DeLong.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a point of clarification on what's happening in other states, California does require return to original contour. That's their regulatory standard, not backfill, meaning everything has to be obliterated back to original contour, everything put back in the pit. All the other states, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, do not require backfill of pit lakes.
Okay, committee, do we have any other questions? Okay, seeing none, would you like to go on to support? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to, because we have people in Elko, we have people in Las Vegas, we have people on the phones, and obviously people in Carson City. So we're going to do equal amounts of time for each for support, opposition, and neutral. So it's going to be 8 minutes in each location for a total of 32 minutes in support, 32 minutes in opposition, 32 minutes in neutral. We'll do 2 minutes at a time. If you are with a group and you want to give each other your time, if you can do that. But so we're going to get started in, let's start in Las Vegas. The people in Carson City, you can come and fill in the chairs, but we're going to get started in Las Vegas with support. Again, we will be timing for 2 minutes for a total of 32 minutes, and it is 5:58 right now. So please go ahead in Las Vegas.
Hi, my name is Sarah Walkley. I'm the Mining Justice Organizer with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada in support of Assembly Bill 313. PLAN believes that everyone has the right to live in a clean and healthy environment, regardless of their race, gender, income, or immigration status. In the driest state in the nation, as the climate crisis worsens, not addressing unnecessary water waste is a direct threat to a clean and healthy environment for current and future Nevadans. We know from decades of organizing with communities on the front lines of mining that low income and communities of color are disproportionately impacted by the mining industry's mismanagement of our collective natural resources. Mining pit lakes are not only a toxic legacy left by the industry, but they unnecessarily waste fresh water and leave communities to suffer the consequences, all while people across the state are concerned about dwindling water. For example, here in Vegas, people are increasingly stressed about our water systems and are facing restrictions and fines if they don't take steps to conserve water. Nevadans want to know why the mining industry is not being responsible with our fresh water. How can they just walk away? Why aren't they required to do a simple thing to prevent significant water waste? AB 313 would help ensure the industry has to take responsibility to not waste water in pit lakes. This bill would require mining companies to clean up their mess and conserve some of the water they waste. Nevadans deserve access to clean air, water, and environment, and that means putting people and planet before profits. Please support this bill. This bill is about protecting our water. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in Las Vegas.
Hi, my name is Lakin Kelly, in support of Assembly Bill 313. Bottom line is this bill is about water. As a lifelong Nevadan, in a general sense, we all understand and are concerned about drought. I can speak to that, especially in southern Nevada. Water waste is just not acceptable here. That's pretty much the common sentiment. Mining companies really ought to embrace the best practice that's proposed by this bill, and our Nevada legislature has a responsibility to require that we protect these resources. As a graduate student who has studied environmental science and discourse around mining and electric energy, I do believe this bill is timely and important for protecting water resources right now, as Nevada becomes such a focus in the electric energy transition. So we all need to do our part with water, and this is about water, so thank you so much for your time.
Oh, hello, good evening. For the record, my name is Sean Navarro. I'm here to speak in favor of AB 313. I want to thank Assemblywoman Sarah Peters for bringing this bill forward. Unlike Assemblywoman Peters, I'm very much not a scientist, so I appreciate both her and Mr. Hatters explaining this bill and breaking down this very important issue. I believe the water in Nevada belongs to the people, and this bill is about water. As previously stated, pit lakes have a disastrous effect to nearby groundwater and surface water, rendering that water completely unusable. Pit lakes destroy nearby ecological systems and poison local communities that live around these pit mine lakes, communities such as indigenous communities and small family farms. It's expected that 550 billion gallons of water, or 1.5 million acre feet, is to be locked up, made unusable, and wasted by these pits. That's 3 times the annual usage of water in Las Vegas. I want to speak about this bill as someone who was not born here in Nevada, but someone who chose Nevada as their home. I originally came here for work, but I found so much more here than just a job. I found community, I truly found a home. And since the state has given me so much, I feel I owe a debt to the state to make sure this state is protected. I believe all Nevadans share in this responsibility to be a good stewards to our state, to our home. And we have to do all we can to ensure the state is habitable, not just for ourselves and our neighbors, but for future generations of Nevadas. This bill is not targeting or attacking the mining industry. This bill is simply asking the mining industry to take responsibility for their mining practices. This bill is asking the mining industry to use only a small portion of their vast financial resources to do their part in preserving the most valuable of all of our state's natural resources, which is water. We can agree this state has been very good to the mining industry, and this bill asks that the mining industry be good to the state by protecting the public from pit lakes they created. It's literally the least they can do. I ask this committee to pass this bill and protect the future of Nevada. Please protect the people of Nevada's water. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next person in Las.
Good evening, and thank you to the chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Nathaniel Phillips. I live in downtown Las Vegas. I want to echo the sentiments of Presenter John Hatter and also fellow speakers that this is about water, one of our most precious natural resources in one of the driest regions in our country and the world. And it's also perhaps one of the most responsible things that you have the opportunity to pass this session. It does better by our natural resources, the people's water, and it also balances costs to industry, as we've heard concern from this afternoon. But let's please speak clearly on behalf of your constituents when it comes to voting. Your role as legislators requires you to make decisions in the best interests of our state's resources. And I gotta be honest, it stretches belief that in the most profitable and industry-friendly state in the union, that international mining conglomerates cannot afford to preserve the quality of water that they removed or that is removed from the water table in the course of another, in the course of an industry that Nevada is very proud of, which is mining. But other industries across the state, as well as Nevadans up and down and across our state, conserve our water. Pit lakes currently hold more water than 3 years' usage of our largest city in Nevada. Make it make sense. We can't. Gaps in the current statute enable this problem, and chairwoman and committee members, you can start to fix it. Lastly, it is so important that city folks like myself and others here in Vegas show up in solidarity on issues that impact other parts of our state. We love all of Nevada. This bill will do something to protect rural communities, indigenous communities, agricultural communities. They deserve this respect, and so does our state's water. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Las Vegas, please go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Justin Van Wyck. I'm speaking in support of AB 313. I have worked in conservation projects in every county of Nevada over the last decade. One of those conservation projects was even funded by Barrick Gold. I distinctly remember Barrick hiring a videographer to make sure to film all the great environmental work we were completing. You know, they made sure to they get the videographer on the helicopter to get some aerial footage of us. But I do find it incredibly ironic that when the videographer is flying in circles around us, that if he'd only tilt his camera up to the horizon in the distance, he would have filmed a pit lake. A pit lake created by an industry that loves to appear to be environmentally friendly, yet has no intention to fix the real mess they left behind. Please support this bill. Thank you.
Okay, and in Las
Hi,
Vegas, you've
my
got
name is
about
Zach
a
Brill.
minute, so please go
Perfect.
ahead, and if there's anything we missed from your testimony, you can submit it. But yeah, you've got a minute.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Zach Brill. I live in Assembly District 35. Pit lakes are avoidable. In the driest state in our nation, however, they are unacceptable. If backfilling their pits would indeed destroy the future of the industry as they have claimed, this bill enables them to apply for an exemption and requires they hold a public meeting to make these processes more transparent to impacted communities. Please support Assembly Bill 313. This is about protecting our water.
Thank you very much. And coming to Carson City, please go ahead.
My name is John Solomon, and I'm a member of Faith in Action, and I support AB 313. When I finished graduate school, my first job was in the design and engineering of the largest man-made mechanical device on the planet, a high-speed bulk conveyor for the hard rock mining industry in Australia. I also worked on the conveyor designed for numerous pit and underground mines. As such, I have a very good in-depth understanding of the costs and challenges of pit mining. Of course, the cheapest thing to do is to leave a big mess when done mining. I also realize it is impossible to leave it in the same condition it was before the mine existed. I lived in rural Nevada for 22 years, and it is obvious that water is the most valuable resource we have. Without the safeguards called for in AB 313, we will have a net financial loss for rural Nevada. If you look at the value of clean, fresh water in a desert environment, the water that is being polluted by the pit mining industry is worth more than the value of the cost of complying with AB 313. It is undeniable that water's value now is far greater than any tax revenue created by the pit mine if AB 313 is not passed. Not passing AB 313 is a very large financial burden for the residents of rural Nevada, both long and short term. The costs of cleaning up polluted groundwater are astronomical and rarely even feasible. The only viable path forward is to keep it clean. Therefore, the passage of AB 313 is a win for residents of Nevada. The only people who are against this have not made a rational, informed...
Sir, you're at 2 minutes. If you can wrap it up, and you can submit
Okay.
anything in writing that you'd like.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Patrick Donnelly, Great Basin Director with the Center for Biological Diversity. We're in support of AB 313, and we are grateful to Assemblywoman Peters for sponsoring this important legislation. I'm not going to go into the reasons we support this bill because you've heard lots about the effects of pit lakes. Instead, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the critiques we've heard of this bill. You know, this bill is not about stopping mining. It's about regulating a very specific environmental impact inherent to open pit mining below the water table. So that applies to a very small fraction of mines. Most mines don't go below the water table. And so this applies to the small fraction of mines who do go below the water table with an open pit that requires this extra level of environmental attention to ensure permanent damage isn't done to our aquifers. Now you'll hear, oh, Nevada has the gold standard for mining regulation. Well, in fact, mining.com ranked Nevada as the friendliest jurisdiction in the world for mining. Now, the mining industry isn't going to call this the friendliest jurisdiction in the world for mining if we've got the gold standard for mining regulation. In fact, it is an incredibly permissive standard that allows the mining industry to get away with things that they might not get away with elsewhere. In effect, the people of Nevada are subsidizing the mining industry right now with the water of Nevada. The water of Nevada is impacted by mining, and this is effectively a subsidy to industry. So you'll hear, well, this could make mines unprofitable. But this is really about mining cleaning up their mess and eliminating that subsidy that Nevadans are providing through water for the mines. So if a mine, the only way it can be profitable is by leaving a mess for future generations, then maybe that's not a viable mine. Again, we're going to hear this could increase carbon emissions because all the carbon you use pulling rock out of the ground, you're going to have to use to stick that rock back in the ground. However, again, if mining can't clean up their own messes, then perhaps those mines are not viable. So in conclusion, please support this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress, here today in support of AB 313. Water is essential for the health and well-being of all Nevadans. As a state that is suffering through drought, it is vital that we protect all our sources of water. We know that the mining industry in Nevada is responsible for pumping millions of gallons of Nevada's water every day. Their current practices do not require them to reclaim these pits, they effectively waste and oftentimes pollute precious groundwater. In fact, their history with this practice has been less than stellar. It has been downright dangerous for some of our communities in this state, like what we saw in Yerington. We thank Assemblywoman Peters for her work on this important issue, and we hope you will support AB 313. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Olivia Tanager. I'm here on behalf of the Nevada Environmental Justice Coalition, urging you to support AB 313. Water conservation is one of the Nevada Environmental Justice Coalition's priorities, and this is a great example of a water conservation measure. We want you to keep in mind that this bill is about water, and all that we're asking you to do is to ask mining to clean up after themselves and consider communities in water scarce regions. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Matthew Tanager. I'm speaking in support of AB 313 as someone who works in outdoor recreation and is an avid outdoorsman. In September of this past year, I traveled to Yerington and visited the Anaconda Pit mine and the lake that is there. What I was greeted with was not a body of water that is compatible with life, human or animal, or that has any kind of clear beneficial use. For people who in the room who are not familiar, Nevada is along what's called the Pacific Flyway, important birding area. And as a very dry state, any body of water that is on the surface is incredibly important for these birds to use as they go our north-south path. For these lakes to then consume this water and leave it toxic and unusable for wildlife, I find incredibly irresponsible. I think regardless of the profitability of the mining industry, these operators should be held to a certain level of due diligence and clean up their mess. I would like you to please consider supporting AB 313 to prevent unnecessary wastage of our water in the driest state in the nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we have about a minute left in Carson City for support. So if anyone, looks like there's about 3 people left, if you can just say your names if you're with a group, and then if you want to submit your testimony written, we'll accept that.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Lanahan, and I'm here on behalf of the Las Vegas Paiute Tribe, and we are in support. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Cohen and members of the committee. My name is Jonathan McNeil, and I'm here today on behalf of Patagonia in support of AB 313. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Cassandra Lisenby. I'm with Great Basin Resource Watch, a multi-generational Nevadan, and I urge you to support AB 313. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we will go to Elko. Do we have anyone in support in Elko? Did we lose Elko?
Yes.
Okay, we can hear you, we can't see you, so anyone in support in Elko, please go ahead.
For the record, my name is Mary Gibson. I'm Western Shoshone from Elko. Greetings, Madam Chair and committee members. I am here to ask that you support AB 313 related to the mining water reclamation. While the mining industry has land reclamation responsibilities after a project's ending, it is also critical to consider water reclamation for conserving Nevada's fresh water. One toxic stew of wasted water in need of conservation is pit lakes. Many of these lakes will develop acid sulfate conditions with high levels of dissolved metals, making it unusable and hazardous. The mining industry's misuse of the precious and vital source isn't even considered in reclamation projects, and yet billions of gallons of water is extravagantly and carelessly expended on a daily basis, while the citizens of Nevada are asked to minimize water use during times of drought. How is that the industry has a right to waste and destroy our water source? Indigenous peoples' lands and resources have always been sacrificial zones for industry, often violating our human rights and nature's right to exist and thrive. There are 16 pit lakes located on the unceded treaty territory of the Western Shoshone. These 16 pit lakes on our land represents a loss of water for consumption, access to water, to plants and medicinal foods, and the potential danger to humans and wildlife. While the mining industry and their employees are afforded to relocate at the conclusion of a mining project, We as Western Shoshone don't have that opportunity, as this is our homelands, our mother country, New Wesogobia. I implore you to pass AB 313 to include water reclamation by eliminating pit lakes in Nevada. It's time this massive and powerful industry take responsibility and do their part in conserving precious water sources. Water is medicine. Water is sacred. Water is life. Us.
Thank you. Next person in Elko, please.
Hello, thank you. My name is Fermina Stevens, Western Shoshone, in support of AB 313. Nevada's goal is to grow its economy through lithium mining, making Nevada ground zero for energy transition and energy independence. The plan is focused on expanding vehicle production and technological innovations. While this plan might sound like heaven to the mining industry, saying the right words does not right the destruction caused, because the destruction of land and water is what has to happen in order to make this goal a reality. With that in mind, in the coming years, Nevada will have more pit lakes than any other state in the US. Billions of gallons of toxic water behind fences, with some being built next to rivers and streams. Who benefits the most from this scheme? In this drought, mining is the biggest user and abuser of water in Nevada, and they are the least held accountable for overuse, along with corporations, casinos, and billionaires. The mines say it's not fair to backfill the pit because they might want to remine later. Is it fair that they threaten the livelihood of community members who speak in favor of this bill? Is it fair that foreign corporations will come to destroy the land and water and then go home after the water is polluted and their pockets are full? Is it fair that plants and animals will not have water to survive? They say there is no problem with pit lakes, as they ignore the chemical reactions and acid accumulation at Anaconda. Start reclaiming the water that has already been sacrificed. The mines say the evaporation is small and irrelevant. What they mean is that Nevada is expendable. Who will pay the price for this grand scheme? It'll be the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Nevada who pay the price, not the grandchildren of corporations or billionaires. In this time of drought, we need to keep an eye on the future of Nevada and demand that rule makers, policymakers, lawmakers make the security of public water a priority. Support AB 313. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person in Elko.
Opposition. This is it for a favor.
Yes, I'm sorry, still in favor.
Yeah, this was the last person in favor.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we're going to go to the phones. In just a moment. Okay, so we're going to go to the phones in support. Everyone has 2 minutes, but we have 8 minutes for support. So if you want to let your other people have time, please be as brief as possible. And with that, BPS, please have the first person in support on the phones.
If you would like to testify in support of AB 313, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead if you're in
Okay,
support.
my name is Yesenia Moya. My name is Yesenia Moya, YESENIA I am a resident of Las Vegas, and I am in full support of this bill. Thank you to the Assembly for bringing this forward. As somebody that lives down here in Vegas, I can only water on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. If I overwatered, I can pay anywhere between $80 and thousands, almost up to $5,000 for a violation if I overwater. Now, mining is having some type of issue with us just having them clean up after themselves. This isn't against mining. This is about water. This is about reclaiming water. This is ensuring that all Nevadans get to use the water that is here. Again, I get penalized for watering on days that are not Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. But mining wastes thousands of gallons and has not and does not want to clean up after themselves. This bill will ensure that they do, and that our families are here for generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam
BPS.
Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera-Georgeson. I'm the Deputy Director of the Nevada Conservation League. We'll echo what's already been said. Our water resources are precious, and we urge the committee's support. Thank you.
Hi, for the record, Dwight George with NVAN, Native Voters Alliance, Nevada. I'm also a member of the Fallon Paiute Shoshone Tribe, and I am here to support this bill about water. I think that it should be noted that a lot of the people that you're hearing about in support of this bill are from conservation leagues, or they're from people that just love the outdoors. And also, very importantly, and very underrepresented, is the tribal voices, the indigenous voices, the people that actually care for this land and have always called this land home. And I don't think that that could be underwritten or anything. And just like it's been stated before, there is too much thought on profits for mines over the effects that that has on the people and the places that they end up overtaking. And that is what it is when they do mine. They do overtake. It is an ultimately irreversible and potentially always damaging thing. And I feel like the people that are supporting this are truly just looking to take care of the land and the water, which is super important here, where we don't have enough, and that regular people are constantly told to regulate while the mines get to use as much as they can to get as much for themselves as they can, and then ultimately just leave the land scarred and hurt for everybody that has always called it home. So we just want to be able to take care of it better and also watch after it better, as I feel like everyone should. And I believe that water is the top of everyone's list here, being in Nevada, being in the desert. And I just want to see everyone being taken care of along with the land. And that is possible with this bill. So please support this bill about the water.
Thank you, sir. Can you give us your name one more time?
Yeah, it is Dwight George.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Caller with the last three digits 445, please press *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello, Chair Cohen and members of the committee. My name is Teresa Crawford, TERESA-CRAWFORD, volunteer member of the Sierra Club's Legislative Committee. On behalf of our 30,000 members and supporters statewide, we are strongly in support of Assembly Bill 313, with thanks to Assemblywoman Peters for spotlighting the wastage and pollution of the people's water caused by unfilled, abandoned mining pits. This bill finally cures the serious omission of water in the requirements for post-mining reclamation plans that currently only include land. This is a devastating waste of Nevada's most precious resource, as the statistics that we've already heard about the potential sequestration of millions of acre feet of water in existing pit mines. These ground and surface waters rightfully belong to the ecosystem surrounding them, and we call on industry to respect that water conservation is the Nevada way of life and take responsibility to prevent new pit lakes from ever forming by planning for backfill before ground is ever broken. For all of these reasons, the Sierra Club values the right of humanity to clean, accessible water and the sustainable use of resources. Pit lakes render groundwater unusable in perpetuity, the opposite of sustainability. We urge you to support Assembly Bill 313 and protect the people's waters. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak. My name is Catherine Moses, and I'm speaking here today because I care deeply about protecting our natural resources in Nevada. 6 years ago, I moved to Elko to work for the state, and during my time there, I became an avid adult onset hunter, angler, and backpacker. I lived in Elko for 4 years, and during my time recreating and living there, I witnessed firsthand the impacts that our mining has had on our landscape. I toured underground mines and have hunted in hot springs within the vicinity of surface pit mines. Mining creates large wounds in and on our lands, and these wounds need to heal into scars rather than festering and potentially causing harm to people or the environment. Most of the friends I made in Elko were geologists or environmental managers for Nevada gold mines, and they share the same values and respects for the outdoors that I do. They educated me about the need for mines and providing gold and other minerals to support our country's infrastructure, technology, and currency. They confidently told me how mines reclaim their sites as required by law. These laws, however, do not require that surface water or groundwater be reclaimed. That's why I'm here to support the passing of AB 313, which would require mines to start thinking about the reclamation of our water. According to the BLM's website, 49% of Nevada public lands host mining programs. Mining companies should not get to exploit our valuable land. They must use our land responsibly and minimize their impacts. This land is our land. This water is our water. Our water resources need to be protected so that our environment remains healthy for generations to come. So I urge you all to support this bill and to protect our water resources and our environment. Thank you.
EPS, do we have anyone else in support on the phone?
Hi, yes.
Okay, so
Dear Chair Cohen and members of the committee.
So we're at the end of support, and you have about a minute. If there's anything else you have to say, feel free to send us your testimony in writing, but please be very quick.
Okay. Dear Chair Cohen and members of the committee, this is about water. My name is Maeve Moynihan, resident of Yerington, Nevada, and I'm speaking in support of AB 313. As a resident of Yerington and a previous employee of the Walker Basin Conservancy, I believe that with your support of this bill, our beloved state will have a brighter future in relation to our aquifers and demand for water. This bill is an opportunity to hold mines accountable for the unaffordable amounts of water that would otherwise get wasted in pit lakes, especially since, according to Legislators Research Division, 50% of the basins in Nevada are over-allocated. It is vital to hold mines responsible for the thorough backfill of these holes created by mines so we don't lose more of this precious resource in the name of other resources. We can't drink money. This bill is about protecting our water, which will ultimately protect ourselves and our beloved and resilient wildlife. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so with that, it is 6:28. We started support at 5:58. So we are going to move to opposition. People can start to fill up the chairs in Carson City. Is there anyone in opposition in Las Vegas? Okay, seeing none. And is there just the one person in Elko in opposition? Sir, in Elko, are you the only one in opposition?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so I am gonna let Carson City have a little more time and the phones have a little more time. So we're gonna get started. We will go to the phones, and Elko, but then we'll come back to Carson City. But you can go ahead and get started.
All right, Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Greg Gibson, and I'm Vice President of Operations, Americas for SSR Mining. I also serve as chairperson of the Nevada Mining Association. I appear before you today in opposition of AB 313. I'd like to thank Assemblywoman Peters for meeting with our staff and discussing these issues. We share her belief that Nevada's water resources should be protected. The fact is, existing federal laws and state regulations already require mining companies to account for the impacts of pit lakes, which may form after mining has been completed. This thorough and scientific analysis takes place long before the pit lake develops, and public comment on the plans is always invited. This is governed by NRS 519A.230 and NAC 519A.250, and the Bureau of Mining Regulation and Reclamation manages this process with oversight from the State Engineering Commission. As introduced, this bill would make new open pit mining projects extremely unlikely and could have put existing mines out of business, ironically accelerating the creation of new pit lakes. While we appreciate the sponsor's suggested amendment, the bill will still potentially create new environmental problems and make new open pit mine development challenging, if not impossible. The fact is, every pit lake is like a fingerprint. Each has its own geological factors, and each requires careful analysis from regulators on a case-by-case basis. I know this from personal experience, as I'm currently in the middle of permitting in northern Nevada. In my current role, I see mining operations all around the world, and Nevada's mining regulations are a model for the country and the world, because Nevada's mining environmental regulators already prioritize protection of the public's health and welfare. NVMA would welcome the chance to work with NDP and Assemblywoman Peters to identify any updates that may be needed to Nevada's stringent regulatory structure. Thank you.
Mr. Gibson, is there anything in the bill that you would endorse and approve of as amended?
I'll let Alan speak to this.
Thank you. Alan Biaggi with the Nevada Mining Association. At this time, the bill and its amendment is not acceptable, and as Mr. Gibson has stated, we're willing to work with the sponsors to find areas of agreement, but at this time, we are opposed to the bill.
Okay, and you were answering my question, so if you want to start, if there's anything else you want to say, please go ahead.
Here is. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and the Natural Resources Committee members. My name, as I stated, is Alan Biaggi, and I represent the Nevada Mining Association. We appreciate the amendment to AB 313 and the sponsor's willingness to discuss it with us. However, the industry remains opposed to the bill and to the amendment. First, the amendment still changes requirements in the middle of the permitting process. Mines often take 10 years or more to complete the necessary environmental reviews at the state and the federal levels. This bill, as amended, would put into place new mandates that would take in effect less than a year. This would leave a project that is well into the permitting process with an entirely new regulatory scheme along with new economic criteria. Second, the amendment introduces language such as clear and convincing evidence, by a preponderance of the evidence, and reasonable mine plan. These are all new terms that are not defined in the bill and create significant uncertainty for existing and new projects. Who makes these decisions and who decides what is a reasonable mine plan? Perhaps most importantly, the economic component is of great concern. The stated implication is that under the amendment, the state will determine business profitability. Third, the amendment leaves existing mines with new operators with significant uncertainty. Take the case of a mine that has ceased operation and is in closure, but then sells the project to a new operator that seeks to reopen the mine. Would they be treated like a new permit under the provisions of the bill and face the prospect of backfilling a pit that was never contemplated in the original mine reclamation plan? Finally, the proper venue for this issue is through a regulatory petition to the State Environmental Commission. The statutory authority is already in place. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Joel Donaldson. I'm head of permitting and environmental for Nevada Gold Mines. I'm here testifying in opposition to AB 313 on behalf of the company. I am an environmental engineer and an ecologist, and my role is to make sure that we mine responsibly. I am also a father of 4 with a family that loves to spend time outdoors. Mining's impact on the environment matters to me, but this bill will not protect the environment. As you heard, we already backfill pits where the science shows that it makes sense. We looked at the numbers to backfill our other open pits, and they are staggering. 3 billion tons of rock hauled, 760 million gallons of diesel burned, $7 billion in cost, 9 million tons of greenhouse gas emitted, and 25 billion gallons of water used. And this bill is supposed to be about preventing wasted water. The material needed to backfill is not even available because it's been used in tailing storage facilities and heap leach pads. This bill will also shorten the lives of new mines or prevent them from starting, leaving valuable minerals behind, wasting Nevada's mineral endowment. Backfilling pits prevents expansion. We started the Gold Quarry pit in the 1980s with a 5-year mine plan. Processing technology improved and gold prices increased, and we continue to mine that pit today. If we had to backfill it after 5 years, we would have sterilized the pit, ending the jobs of people who spent whole careers there. This bill won't protect water quality or the public, but it will put Nevada mining companies out of business and irreparably harm the economy of our state and our local communities. When I think about what this bill will mean, I can't help but consider the thousands of Nevada families who will be impacted, including my own. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Deborah Strusacker, and I'm here to testify today on behalf of the Women's Mining Coalition. Pit backfilling to eliminate pit lakes is not a prescription for protecting the environment. The premise in AB 313 that backfilling will benefit the environment is flawed, because at some mines, backfilling will create environmental problems. At others, backfilling will forego the habitat and recreational opportunities that some pit lakes provide. Nevada's laws and regulations prohibit pit lakes from degrading waters of the state and require mine operators to use best available science to determine how to protect the environment. AB 313 turns that evaluation upside down by imposing one-size-fits-all backfilling unless an operator can prove that backfilling will harm the environment. Nevada should not settle for this second-rate environmental outcome. Nevada's regulatory scheme for mines requires a detailed analysis of the site-specific geologic, environmental, and hydrologic characteristics at each mine. AB 313's universal pit lake backfilling mandate throws site specificity out the window. AB 313 simultaneously seeks to ban pit lakes and also to provide the public with greater access to pit lakes. This irreconcilable internal contradiction demonstrates that this bill is ill-conceived and unworkable. AB 313 will cause unnecessary environmental impacts because backfilling large pits will require decades-long unmining operations that will consume enormous amounts of diesel, electricity, and water. AB 313 will chill investment in lithium exploration and development, obstruct Nevada's goals to become a lithium supply chain powerhouse, and diminish Nevada's standing as an excellent place for mineral investment. Because AB 313 will weaken Nevada's
we're over 2
regulations,
minutes, if you can wrap it up, please.
we urge the committee to uphold Nevada's regulations and reject AB 313. Thank you.
Thank you, and we're at 6:38, so we're over the time in Carson City. Like I said, it sounds like we're gonna have time to come back to Carson City, but I'm gonna go to Elko and have the gentleman in Elko speak. Sir, you have 2 minutes.
Chairwoman and the committee, thank you for this opportunity. There are catch-22 aspects of the bill which seem contrary to the mission of the Division of Environmental Protection. Conducive geology and hydrology, along with scientific and engineering advancements and accomplishments, can foster beneficial pit lakes or wetlands. They have been across history, with those opportunities allowed by existing statute and regulation. Backfilling operates on the same scale as the original mining, such as time, fuel consumption, fuel emissions, and water for dust control. Heap leach operations may not have sufficient backfill, as upon closure, the leached rock is within lined and capped heaps and unsuitable for placing as an exposed backfill. Must they mine excessively to produce backfill? By disallowing an exception to backfill, the bill forces reclamation of slopes and rock faces which cannot be feasibly reclaimed. That essentially guarantees those projects will not proceed. The bill can require an operation to flatten pit slopes and rock faces, further broadening the environmental disturbance and eliminating potential airy and other wildlife habitats. The bill needlessly hinders resource development and job creation while confounding environmental protection. The proposed amendment simply codifies an income stream for select consultants. Thank you very much. Please oppose the bill.
Sir, can we get your name, please?
Oh, excuse me, this is Ralph Sakerson from Elko.
Okay, thank you. And just to confirm, you're the only one left in opposition in Elko, right? Okay, so we're going to
Yes,
go
ma'am.
to the phones in opposition right now for about 8 minutes. So BPS, if we can please go to the phones for opposition.
If you would like to testify in opposition to AB 313, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits 672, please press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello, I did not press *6 to unmute myself for opposition. I'm waiting for neutral. I didn't push any buttons, it just unmuted me.
Okay,
So
thank
go
you,
ahead and
ma'am. We'll
mute me
put you
again.
back in neutral.
Catherine Ivanov, aka Mrs. Fixit. The bill that is standing right now, I am in opposition. Thank you. Have a lovely day. Oh, ditto.
Thank you, ma'am. Next person in opposition?
Chair, there are no additional callers in opposition at this time.
Okay, so we're gonna come back to Carson City. We started opposition at 6:29, so we will go through to 6:59. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Shantae Lassard, and I am with Hudbay Minerals. I am here today to express Hudbay Minerals' opposition to AB 313, an act to revise provisions relating to mining reclamation. We believe that the mine reclamation requirements proposed in the bill, specifically the requirement to backfill mine pits, are both punitive and unnecessary and could lead to unintended environmental harm, as well as significantly affecting the economics of existing and future mining operations in Nevada. Backfilling a mine pit once operations are complete seems like the right thing to do from an environmental standpoint, but it could lead to unintended negative environmental impacts. For example, the process of loading and trucking material back into a pit will necessarily include years of additional dust and tailpipe emissions from loaders and haul trucks. Additionally, the current language does not consider what type of material would be appropriate for backfilling pits. In some circumstances, the material available at a site would degrade groundwater quality if it were placed back into a pit where groundwater could saturate and flow through it. AB 313 also puts proposed new mining projects in Nevada at risk, including Hudbay's proposed Mason project located west of Yerington. Hudbay plans to spend approximately $2 billion to build this new copper mine and pay hundreds of millions in state and local taxes over the project's life. The Mason project would also create 500 good full-time jobs in an area with above-average unemployment and very few similar opportunities for economic development. While the economic impact of AB 313 on the Mason project is not yet clear, it could be significant enough to impact Hudbay's development plans. For all the reasons outlined above, I urge you and all committee members to oppose AB 313. There are likely more efficient and effective ways to achieve the goals of AB 313 than simply requiring that all pits be backfilled. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tim Dimmick, and I'm the General Manager of Core's Rochester Mine, located here in Pershing County, Nevada, where our 350 employees produce silver and gold. We appreciate the willingness of Assemblywoman Peters to work with the mining industry on this bill and the effort put forth to amend the bill. However, even with the amendments, we are still opposed to the proposed legislation. AB 313, if enacted, would essentially make mining in Nevada economically and environmentally infeasible. The legislation would require any open pit excavated below the water table to be backfilled. The text of the bill ignores decades of science, decades of regulatory oversight of pit lakes, and ignores the credibility of the federal National Environmental Policy Act, otherwise known as NEPA, under which all modern open pit mining occurs when on or connected to federal lands. The NEPA process, which covers the vast majority of Nevada mine plans, is an exhaustive, open, and public process that formally assesses the mine plan to provide the most environmentally protective option for a mining operation. The creation of pit lakes that occur under the guidance of NEPA are done so because that is the most environmentally protective alternative to prevent surrounding water sources from being impacted. A state law mandating backfill will inevitably be in direct conflict with the federal NEPA process in some situations. We should allow science, favorable modern mining practices, and comprehensive suite of state and federal regulations to guide how we create and maintain or backfill mine pits. We respectfully ask the committee to not approve this legislation and allow the scientists, engineers, and other experts to continue to do their jobs in protecting the environment surrounding pit lakes. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Steve Walker. I represent Eureka County. Eureka County, in support of the mining industry, is in opposition to AB 313.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the records, my name is Frederick Pate, and I serve as the chairman of the Nevada Mining Association's Environmental Committee. Also, for the records, I'm a geochemist by trade. I'm also the senior environmental manager at KGHM Mine in Ely. I appear before you on behalf of the Nevada Mining Association in opposition to AB 313. We appreciate Assemblywoman Peters meeting with us and discussing her goals with bringing this bill forward. We share her goals of discussing and ensuring the wise protection of our natural resources. The mining industry is subject to environmental regulations at both the state and the federal level. A blanket requirement to backfill pit lake is not protective of the waters of the state. Depending on the type of rock used to backfill a pit lake, metals could be released into solution and impact the waters of the state. What type of rocks will be used to backfill the pit lake? Do we have to backfill the pit lake from which the waste rock would come from? Where will that waste rock to backfill the second pit come from? In attempt to solve one problem, could you be creating others? What problem are we trying to solve here? Nevada mining's regulations for reclamation are the model for the world in ensuring a protective post-mining use of the land. BMRR has a step-by-step process for pit lake predictive models. These step-by-step processes, when followed, will accurately predict the chemistry for a pit lake. There are regulations in place to mitigate pit lakes that have the potential to impact the waters of the state. AB 313 would introduce entirely new legal paradigm that projects will be subject to. And because the elements are not defined and the standards not set.
Sir, we're at 2 minutes, if you could wrap up.
Okay. The courts will have to make those decisions. AB 313 places risks to closely 40,000 jobs that the Nevada mining industry provides. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Hello. My name is Allison Anderson. I am the Community and Government Affairs Manager at I-80 Gold. We are a 3-year-old Nevada-based gold mining company with our headquarters in Reno, Nevada. We operate 4 legacy sites in northern Nevada, each unique in its own right and each in its own stage of production and permitting. Today, we employ approximately 120 employees and work with hundreds of vendors and contractors. In the next few years, we plan to grow our operations and our workforce. AB 313, as drafted, would stop our plan of operations dead in its track and bankrupt our company. AB 313, as amended, is better than bankruptcy, but it creates redundancy and uncertainty for mining companies like ours doing business in Nevada and requires us to engage with regulators in a way that is excessive. Section 4 of the bill requires NDEP to determine both undue economic hardship and the reasonableness of a mining plan, then requires public hearings around that mining plan. In no other part of Nevada law do we require a business to prove whether their business model is reasonable in the eyes of state regulators. Should this bill pass, it would create an extremely challenging mining climate in Nevada and lead to certain bankruptcies for many companies. This creates a scenario where the state may become the responsible party for reclamation and closure activities, and this is not the desired outcome for anyone. Our goal as an industry is to mine and to mine responsibly. We urge your defeat of this measure. I also invite you to visit our sites at any time, and our team would be happy to show you all of the effort and energy that goes into a safe and responsible mining operation. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, members of the committee. Paul Muratkin with the Vegas Chamber. The Chamber is opposed to AB 313. As you know, the mining industry has been long vested in our community and provides many good paying jobs in our rural communities, and they are an economic engine in our state, and the Chamber does support the industry. As you heard from many folks who have come before me in the industry, there were concerns with the bill originally as drafted and amended. We believe that the bill in either form will lose jobs in the state, will put additional pressure on our social services to make up that lost revenue to those communities, and we believe that this bill is not good for Nevada, and we believe the industry has been responsible. They're regulated at the state level, there are federal regulations too, and the Nevada mining industry has been a landmark landmark industry throughout the world actually of how they operate. Thank you very much.
My name's Jay Dixon. I'm testifying in opposition to AB 313. I'm here today representing Sangatsi Peak Services, a wholly owned subsidiary of Lion Copper and Gold, operator of 2 mining projects in Mason Valley, one of which includes the former Yerington mine. Sangatsi anticipates dewatering the Yerington mine to resume and deepen the pit, adding an essential domestic copper resource to support the green energy supply chain right here in Nevada. As you may be aware, the Yerington mine is undergoing remediation to address a legacy environmental issue under the jurisdiction of the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection. A common misconception is that the pit lake is of poor water quality. In fact, pit lake water samples collected over the last 30 years show current water quality at or near drinking water standards, making this water ideal for other uses. Our project is located in a basin where groundwater pumping has been under pressure from possible regulatory curtailment. Dewatering of the Yerington Pit Lake would provide an opportunity to manage water in the basin such that we could help offset some of that pumping, which may ultimately allow for more water to support a variety of other uses elsewhere in the area. Even with the proposed removal of retroactive language in the amendment, our project could not move forward on the possibility of a regulatory exemption. Investments like this require regulatory certainty, and AB 313, even with the amendments, is anything but certain. AB 313, if passed, modern mining reclamation of the Yerington mine will not occur, which means the community would continue to live with the standard of remediation instead of a comprehensive, modern mine reclamation, and long-term post-closure would continue to be the responsibility of the state and its taxpayers. I encourage you to vote against this. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mackenzie Campbell with Hunt & Sons, Inc., and I'm here on behalf of the Nevada Petroleum Marketers Association and the Nevada Mining Association as a vendor representative. I am here to ask you to vote in opposition of AB 313. Currently, the mining industry provides 37,000 plus direct jobs and thousands of supplier and indirect jobs like myself. Voting in favor of AB 313 puts many of those Nevada jobs in jeopardy due to the impact AB 313 imposes on current and future mining operations. Nevada is home to many precious metal operations and at the forefront of many future renewable resource mining operations. If this bill were to pass, many of these operations could potentially suspend, close, or never begin business in our state. If these operations were to close, it would cause a trickle effect, first affecting the mines, shutting down or downsizing, secondly, affecting my business as a vendor. This then leads to our communities where we are no longer to support our local states and other organizations. For example, Hunt & Sons provides many teacher appreciation lunches in our communities multiple times a year. We do toy drives for underprivileged communities like the 4th Street Corridor here in Reno, and we support Boys and Girls Clubs along with 4-H in our rural communities. As a state, we rely on these industries in both rural and urban counties to provide tax revenue, careers, and community support. On a personal note, as a vendor, I get to visit a lot of these operations, so all of the different companies, and I know how much they care about their communities, their water, and the environment. So I ask you please vote against AB 313. Thank you.
Thank you. And can you please state your name again for the secretary?
Mackenzie Campbell.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kyle Davis today on behalf of the Nevada Mining Association. First, I want to thank Assemblywoman Peters for working with us. We've really enjoyed the conversations that we've had as we've tried to work through these issues and try to come to some place where we might be able to meet. Unfortunately, weren't able to get there on this, and you've heard a lot of the testimony today and why the bill as amended is still problematic. I don't want to take up too much of your time, as I know we've had a very long hearing today. I just want to touch on a couple of quick points that I think came up in the presentation today that deserve addressing. One of the things that was pointed out is that it's not legal to degrade the waters of the state, and we absolutely agree that that is the case, and that is clear in state law. But many of the presenters and many of the support testimony would lead you to believe that mining is exempt from these statutes. We are not. We have to follow all of the laws and regulations having to do with water quality and maintaining water quality. And we are held to these requirements. These are a part of our permits, and there are penalties if we do not hold to these requirements. So this is not a case where mining is somehow exempt from protecting the waters of the state. We are held to those standards just like everybody else. Another thing that you've heard about is the concept of dewatering the pit, leaving the impression that this water is somehow wasted. First of all, I'd like to point out that when a mining operation is dewatering that pit, that water, much of that water is not used consumptively, and the portion that is used consumptively is done so with a water right. But most of that water is returned to the system. So that water is used, it is either re-injected, or is otherwise discharged to the system for other water rights to be able to be used. But furthermore, at the end of the mining operation, that water that's in the pit, that is, again, not locked up in a pit as you're led to believe, but that is available for appropriation under Nevada water law, just like all other groundwater. And the last thing that I'll point to, the discussion came up about the value of wetlands and whether we should, why we wouldn't want to potentially create, in the situation where the bill is requiring that a pit be backfilled above the water table in order to not create a wetland. And the reason given for this is that there is a concern that you could potentially create a toxic wetland.
And we're over 2 minutes, so
Okay,
if
sorry.
you can wrap it up and you can just provide us
I will be
anything in
very
writing.
quick here. The only point that I would make is that under the status quo, we have the ability to treat that water when that exists in a pit. But if you pile, rock into it without any kind of thinking about how that would interact, we don't have any ability to treat that water anymore. So thank you very much for your time, Madam Chair. I apologize I went over my 2 minutes, but hopefully I've covered it all. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we started opposition at 6:28. It is now 6:59, so we are going to go on to neutral. Is there anyone in Las Vegas in neutral? Seeing none. Is there anyone in Elko in neutral? Seeing none. Carson City in neutral. And Assemblywoman Hanson, feel free to ask your question. You're good? Okay.
Good evening,
Go
Chair
ahead.
Cohen and committee members. My name is Mike Vischer. I'm the administrator for the Nevada Division of Minerals, and I'm here testifying neutral on AB 313. Just wanted to remind the committee that the Division of Minerals receives roughly 75% of all of its revenue from the $10 mining claim fee filing that's recorded at the county recorder's office. And more than 40% of that revenue is spent on our abandoned mine lands public safety program. Any bill that negatively impacts interest in locatable mineral exploration and development in Nevada will negatively impact our revenue and result in a decrease in the amount of AML work that gets performed. Additionally, in the amendment, number 3 includes the Division of Minerals as part of the report. The division is a very small agency and does not regulate any of the activities that occur at open pit mines. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. How would the chair like to handle?
The Assemblywoman does have a question, and then if you have any statements, you're also welcome to make a neutral statement.
All right.
But thank you for coming up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry, I know it's late.
And I don't know that my question can be answered very quickly, but because of time, I'll ask it, and then you just see how you could address it. I think what was missing here maybe is that we didn't have a small overview of what current reclamation efforts are as we talk about this process. There's a lot of people here that are new, that aren't even familiar, and a lot of us not in depth. So if you could touch on current reclamation in regards to this issue.
Thank you very much, Assemblywoman Hanson, for the question. With me today, I have Deputy Administrator, I'm Jennifer Carr, Administrator of the Division of Environmental Protection. With me, I have Frederick Perdomo, Deputy Administrator, and I have Robert Kaczynski, Chief of the Bureau of Mine Regulation and Reclamation. Rob does have a few notes about the different branches of BMRR and the different functions, and I think that will answer your question quite directly.
Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, Chairman Cohen and members of the committee. Again, I'm Robert Kaczynski, Kuczynski, Chief of the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection, Bureau of Mining Regulation and Reclamation. It is the mission of the Bureau of Mining Regulation and Reclamation to ensure that Nevada's surface and groundwaters are not degraded by mining operations, and that lands disturbed by mining operations are reclaimed to safe and stable conditions to ensure productive post-mining land use. The Bureau works collaboratively with the mining industry and public to achieve its mission. We are 100% fee-funded by the mining industry. There are 4 technical branches in BMRR: regulation, closure, reclamation, and hydrology, all of which perform program-specific plan review, permitting, inspection, compliance monitoring, and enforcement activities. The branch programs address the design, construction, operation, closure, and reclamation of mining and exploration operations. Operators must file a financial assurance guarantee with the division or federal land manager to ensure that reclamation will be completed should an operator default on the project. The regulation and closure branches regulate mining in Nevada and have the responsibility of protecting waters of the state under the authority of the Nevada Revised Statutes and Nevada Administrative Code 445A. The regulation branch issues water pollution control permits prior to the construction of any mining, milling, or other beneficiation processes activity, and it conducts inspections to ensure that the quality of Nevada's water resources is not impacted by mining and confirm that operations are in compliance with their permit requirements. The need for a 445A permit is not dependent on whether or not a discharge is intended or the quantity of ore to be extracted or processed. Facilities using chemicals for processing ores are generally required to meet a zero discharge performance standard. A separate permit may be issued for certain activities at a specific facility, or a permit may be issued for all activities at a facility. A 445A permit is required for the extraction of ore or previously processed material for beneficiation at any site. A 445A permit does not apply to facilities involved solely in mining. Okay. Closure branch.
Mr. Kaczynski, how much more do you think you have? Because you're welcome to submit anything you have.
Okay.
If there's something
I
more
can do that. I'll talk about the
direct that you can-
reclamation.
Yeah.
Okay, since this is the subject here. The Reclamation Branch regulates exploration and mining activities on public and private lands in Nevada under the authority of Nevada Revised Statutes and Nevada Administrative Code. The branch issues permits to operators to ensure reclamation is conducted for the overall disturbance created by mining and to return the land to safe and stable conditions for a productive post-mining land use. On public lands, the branch coordinates with the Bureau of Land Management or the U.S. Forest Service, and in some cases both. Reclamation permits are required for any exploration, mining, or milling activity that proposes disturbance over 5 acres. State reclamation permits are life of project permits that do not require renewal, but the Reclamation Branch reevaluates the required bond value on a 3-year schedule to ensure that there are adequate funds to reclaim the operation in the event the operator walks away. Continue. Okay. And I'll file the rest of the testimony.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Do you have anything to add, either of you?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Just one thing I wanted to add that maybe sets the baseline with some of that as a backdrop as to what NDEP does. One of the things that I've heard a lot about this evening is, with all due respect to the bill sponsors, much of what they presented is mixing issues related to water rights, beneficial uses, and water quality, which is what we regulate. So all the discussions that you heard about consumptive loss, those sorts of things are not under the purview of NDEP. And so one of the things that we did early on when the bill sponsor shared some information with my predecessor back in February, we looked through some of the initial draft language for the BDR. And that was one of his main concerns, which was that there's a lot of blurring between the Division of Water Resources and the Division of Environmental Protection, and he sought more bifurcation of those issues. Unfortunately, I think a lot of those, that blurring of lines still exists today. And in addition to water use, you also heard things about land use. Again, NDEP is not, doesn't have the authority to dictate land use, final land use issues. That's up to others.
Okay, thank you. Anything else you'd like to add? Okay, thank you.
All right. So for my testimony, Jennifer Carr, again for the record, thank you very much. Super fast. As has been relayed a number of times, Bureau of Mine Regulation Reclamation protects water quality, including groundwater. From the beginning of mining, exploration, through operation, through reclamation, and through closure and post-closure monitoring. At this time, we don't believe that there is a necessity to create additional policy for reclaiming groundwater because we already protect groundwater. It's also unclear how reclamation of groundwater that's being inserted in 519A will intersect with or supersede or complement the existing law that we already have for water quality protection in 445A. We do appreciate the conceptual amendments proposed in Nellis, seeking to limit the scope of the bill to new mines, while also keeping the concept of backfilling a pit that cannot come at the expense of groundwater quality. But there are still concerns. Some of the phrasing in the bill that was mentioned by Assemblyman DeLong does bring in different standards for evaluation that the agency is not used to or never used before, such as preponderance of evidence, clear and convincing evidence, and the bill actually says that something cannot be technically not possible. The presenters used the phrase technically not feasible. Not feasible and not possible are two very different things. But the bottom line, I think, with all of those terms is that we're concerned that the bill will be difficult to interpret and implement as it's drafted today. Just a couple more super quick things. Number 3 of the amendment that newly requires the Division of Minerals and NDP to prepare a report on pit lake impacts related to evaporative losses, land use, and water use. In addition to being overly broad, our concern is that, again, land and water use decisions are outside the purview of NDEP. I forgot to breathe. Finally, the bill does not have an effective date, therefore defaulting to October 1. Considering all of that you've heard tonight, considering the need for regulation revisions, considering our personnel vacancy at the issues at the moment and trouble with recruitment, NDP will not be able to begin this work, we don't believe, until at least calendar year 2025. And I will stop there, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and with that, Mr. Anything else? Okay, thank you for coming in. Anyone else in neutral? Seeing none, we will go to the phones.
If you would like to testify neutral to AB 313, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Hello, for the record, my name is Teresa Melendez, and I'm an Indigenous organizer here in the state of Nevada. And I want to thank Assemblywoman Sarah Peters and Mr. John Hatter for carrying the bill and then sharing a lot of helpful information this evening. And I just want to maybe share a perspective during this neutral conversation, and that I just want to remind folks that Nevada is Indigenous stolen land, and that the mining industry has contributed towards the morbidity and mortality of Native Americans throughout the state. And we're hearing about the appropriate regulations and the ethical mining practices and the gold star standards. But those of us with connections to tribal communities also know that there are cancer clusters throughout the state, and that there are mines all around our reservations, and that the tribes then have the responsibility of cleaning up environmental contamination and paying for, cancer treatments and healthcare often fall on tribal members who did not make any profits and have no say-so in the environmental degradation of their indigenous homelands. Also, in watching this hearing today, it reminds me of, something I think we can think all should think more about, and that these are the indigenous homelands of the Shoshone, Paiute, and Washoe people, and it is the state of Nevada and the 28 federally recognized tribes and colonies that govern this state. And we really need to be conscious of the impact of those of the indigenous people of the state whose lands are most affected. So with that, I'd like to thank the committee for thinking broadly and considering the position of the indigenous people of these lands. Miigwech.
Thank you, BPS. Next person in neutral.
Chair, there are no additional callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. With that, I will call up the bill sponsor for any closing statements.
John Hatter for the record. Again, I thank you very much for this hearing, the committee for listening to all of the stuff. A lot of technical aspects, not used to hearing. Appreciate your time and all your questions, everyone. This is not an easy issue to address, and I think it will take some time. Hopefully, this is a step in the direction, but we do feel like that. I do feel as though the language of looking at reclaiming water systems is something that the time has come, and for Nevada to take some leadership in putting this forward. And I hope the mining industry also can join us in that process of looking at how we reclaim water systems for post-mining use. That's what's critical here when you talk about reclamation. So we hope that can go forward. I do want to mention also some of the comments about economy. That's why we have the clause for an exemption. Again, the language may need some work. Mining companies they develop a feasibility study, and in that feasibility study, they also talk about reserves. So I think there's ample time for the mining companies to determine whether or not they're going to go back in and do additional mining in a location in the future. So I think that the time frame is there and present. My experience in Nevada is there seems to be plenty of time for that evaluation before any kind of backfilling would be needed. So we think that can definitely be addressed. And then also, I think that we hear what the agency's saying about other regulations. Are we mixing agency statutes? Well, the problem is these things do overlap.
how do we address that? And so this is kind of one possibility of addressing access to water and ability to water. So I think that this bill would help to encourage more discussion between agencies and how to address issues that do kind of cross over the line. As many of you know, life in the environment is not made up of rigid lines all the time. There's a lot of times there's gray areas. So I hope that you all will keep that in mind. And I thank you very much for your time and your work as legislators. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for the opportunity to round out some comments and kind of redirect, I think, the narrative here. There were obviously some communication issues with particularly the state agencies, as there was some turnover in that department. I think we must have cross-wised. I didn't realize there was continued issues with the bill, given the discussion that we had via email previously. This bill is really about the responsibility to water. The profitability at what cost? Asking for the evaluation of impact to water and the long-term costs to our state and our resources. And what is our role as legislators? How do we want to direct the policy in the best interest of the state resources? This is about striking the balance between the cost to our future and the cost to our economy. I would continue to invite the Nevada Mining Association and their members to engage in conversation on this. However, our last venture into conversation did not lead to any assistance in writing an amendment to this bill. Or offering even supportive adjustments. So I'm not sure how far we will get with them. But I do appreciate the sentiment and shared with you that their intention is to continue to work on this issue, and we'll hold that to them in the future. Thank you so much for your consideration on this bill and for your time tonight. Bless you all for being up this late with us. And that is all today. Thank you.
Thank you both. So with that, I will bring the hearing on Assembly Bill 313 to a close, and we will go into public comment. Public comment is not an opportunity to redo or rehear bills from the day, but to address any issues that are the purview of this committee. Is there anyone in Carson City who'd like to speak in public comment? Seeing none, is there anyone in Las Vegas who'd like to speak in public comment? Or I'm sorry, ma'am, please come forward. That's fine. Please go ahead when you're ready. You have 2 minutes.
For the record, my name is Janet Murphy, and I'm a former legislature advisor to all 63 legislatures about 20 years ago. I used to be younger than all the legislatures. Now I'm older than all of you. I worked with Kenny Gwynn and many other people. You probably remember Mills, Parks, O'Connell. Maybe you don't know, but anyway, Ann McGinnis, O'Neill, now Dina's here. But anyway, I'm here on behalf, when I was an advisor, I represented the Tahoe Township. I'm third generation of the Tahoe Township. 12 years as an advisor, 31 years of managing the Tahoe Douglas Utility District. When there was 11 advisors of us, I'll just give you a real brief history. There was Guy Hobbs, Marvin Levitt, and I was the one who represented the Tahoe Township utilities as well as fire departments. I'm also on the fire board up at the Tahoe Douglas District. I'm here today because I want to make sure that you all are fully aware of there was a plan as far as in the Tahoe Township, 13 miles from Spooner Summit to the casinos to do a road diet. And I wanted to brief you on it, and I have some information for you. I gave it to Sisolak when he was governor at that time, and also the chair of NDOT, and also Governor Lombardo, who are also on board with this and had also stopped the plan of NDOT reducing the lanes. There's 4 lanes. They were going to reduce the southbound to 1 lane because they were going to make the eastern lane a walking, biking trail with a Jersey barrier, which is a concrete barrier, to separate the 1 lane and the biking lane. So I'm here on behalf of probably all your constituents, my constituents, that live there. It's a flawed plan. I have sewer infrastructure up and down. We have 50 miles of sewer line that runs up and down that highway. If you put a Jersey barrier, like a walking trail, biking trail, there's no way we have access to get to our infrastructure. To maintain emergencies, it's impossible. Not only that, NDOT does drainage on also the roadsides. They use the same type of equipment. They couldn't get it in there either. People forget that we have, and this is what I'm here, and that's why I was an advisor. I was here to educate everybody, because a lot of times there was things that were flaws and you didn't understand, and to educate you and to bring you so that you have adequate information.
And ma'am, we're well over 2 minutes. If you could
Oh,
wrap
I'm
it up
sorry.
and leave us your material.
Somebody yield back their time, though, I think. Didn't you say you can yield back your time?
That was.
I want to give you this information because I will be around here. And I want you to know, because any of these bills that represent that they're going to do anything to that area, I don't care, any agency, who it is, NDOT, TRPA, anybody, I want you to be aware of and put provisions in any of their law that they bring in front of you, any BDR, bill draft requests, I don't care what it is. I will work with them, LCB, but they always say they're working with all the agencies, and they're not. And I want to make sure that we are involved because we have a stake in here, and we want to be the good stewards as well as everybody else. So I want to give you the information. So just remember, if any bill drafts requests come in front of you, I would really appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the distinguished legislatures that we have. God bless you. Hallelujah. And thank you for staying and doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then anyone else for public comment in Carson City? Okay, seeing none. Anyone in Las Vegas for public comment? Okay, seeing none. Anyone in Elko for public comment? Seeing none. Anyone on the phones for public comment?
If you would like to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller, you are unmuted and may begin.
Good evening. My name is Diane Henry.
Please go ahead.
Yes, good evening. My name is Diane Henry. I'm not seeing it on the.
We can hear you.
On the meeting. Oh, okay. Should I start now?
Please go ahead.
My name is Diane Henry, and I strongly oppose AB 220 as written and amended with 3 major concerns. Number one is cost.
Ma'am, this is not proper public comment. We've already had the hearing in the work session for the bill. Public comment is not to rehear bills.
Oh, all right. I was under the impression that public comment at the end of the session could include any of the bills, so I apologize.
No.
Thank you.
But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe that was our last person on the phone. So with that, anything from the committee? Okay, thank you very much, committee and staff. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.